the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must fail to conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is
Wake up!
I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me. Now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now.
White brothers, our sick 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 white brothers.
When he went to Memphis, he makes a statement. He says that, "I don't know what we're going to do with some of my sick white brothers." And I think that that was a pivotal statement on his part, because he came to realize, R-E-A-L-E-Y-E-S, that he was dealing with something that was deeper than his original understanding.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice and Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date is Friday, July 6th, 2012, so I have been told. We will be back on Saturday, that would be tomorrow, July 7th, the compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Hoping to hear from non-white listeners. Dial in, share your observations, codified concepts, codified suggestions on things non-white people can be doing to replace white supremacy with justice immediately, to help us solve problems without creating more problems, and also to sharpen our skill with using words, being able to speak about, converse about racism, white supremacy in the most effective manner. Tomorrow evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We will also be on this Sunday, that would be July the 8th. Robert Dvorak will be joining us for the second time. He was with us towards the end of 2011 to discuss his biography on Jeffrey Dahmer. And we were comparing and contrasting Jeffrey Dahmer's work with that of Jerry Sandusky and what was happening at Penn State, because that was just breaking at the time. And he said he was working on a book on the whole Penn State scandal. And the book is out. It came out just a few months back. We'll be discussing that book. Game Over is the title. I guess with more of the information that's been coming out about the emails and white officials at Penn State concealing information and not doing the correct thing to prosecute and let the proper white authorities know about the criminal activity, pedophilia of Jerry Sandusky, and perhaps more white people being culpable in all of this. Very much looking forward to dialoguing on that. He said when he was on the program at the end of 2011 that he had information about a lot of the victims being black males, and that's something that major news sources haven't touched on, to my knowledge. They really have not commented very much, at least unless I'm misinformed, on the racial classification of the victims. I'm very much interested in seeing if that panned out in the book, if he touches on that, and speaking to him again about that. But that'll be this Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, and 4 p.m. Pacific. Robert Dvorak, the Penn State Jerry Sandusky pedophilia crisis. Also be interesting to hear his thoughts, in my view, the efforts to sympathize with these folks. The article that we read on CNN, there have been some other reports around, hey, this is not a criminal. This is not a bad guy. This is someone who he's suffering from some difficulties, and there should be some sympathy for old Jer. Very much looking forward to that this Sunday. Tune in. As I said, this whole month we'll be doing a lot of broadcasts around sexual molestation, sexual deviance that is promoted in the system of racism, white supremacy. We'll have a lot of programs on that. In fact, even tomorrow for the call-in, if folks want to take some time to discuss that, I think that would be apropos, given the dialogue we had with Sylvia Coleman last weekend. I know there are a lot of victims out there who have dealt with, are dealing with sexual trauma. I definitely want to open up the platform to have more dialogue around that. If people are interested in dialing in, we can do some of that tomorrow. Moving forward, final broadcast on Yurugu. Dr. Marimba Ani's phenomenal work. Really, well, how can I say? I guess I can say it has been quite disappointing that it has not been the book club that I envisioned. One of the callers recently said that they thought that the Yurugu study sessions have been valuable, more so than Gus T Renegade may think. And I just want to be clear, it was not that I didn't think there would be some value to having these sessions and reading, even if it was just me reading from the book and having people become a bit more aware about this book and why I think it's so important, why I've said consistently this book, more than any other book, is responsible for the cows being in existence. It's not that I don't think these programs are of value. It's that I really wanted to have a book session. There were people who requested a book club type broadcast where black people, non-white people could read the book, call in to discuss what they read, share different portions of the book that they thought were important, ask questions. A lot of people, I saw it in the chat room, were saying, they got the book. This was before we started the study sessions, and that they were confused, that they were having difficulty reading it, that it's not the easiest read, which I acknowledge. And they were saying that they were having some trouble with it, and I wanted to give folks an opportunity to participate and dial in, share their experiences, what they thought. And it has been quite disappointing seeing that folks really haven't kept up with the reading, and or if they have, that they haven't called in, which I guess could be the case. But my view, I suspect a lot of people just haven't kept up with the reading. I'm sure some folks didn't have any intention of reading the book from the very beginning, which, I take all that for granted. But I will say that I when Mr. Fuller, the whole Shooby-Doo segment, that clip started with me asking Mr. Fuller about words and saying that language and communication deficiencies, that is a major part of the problem with regards to why we have not replaced white supremacy with justice. And I think a part of that, reading. I've said repeatedly, I don't think that we have recognized the amount of damage that can happen to a group of people who are barred from reading. Not that long ago, Chris Rock's tweets about the 4th of July and slavery, he was correct. We're talking about not that long ago. It was punishable by death to be able to read. I don't think we have really recognized the generational impact that has on a group of people's ability to think and their skill with language and communication. And even if we don't want to go all the way back to the formal plantation, my area of the world, the state of Virginia, they closed the schools for 5 years. This is in the 1960s. We're not talking, 18th century, 19th century. No, we're talking people that are still alive were around then. They closed the schools for 5 years as opposed to allowing black children to get an education. I don't think we have recognized how that negatively impacts a group of people's ability to use language and communicate. I think it results in major deficiencies with regards to reading comprehension. And I think a lot of us, myself included, just with the killing fields, as Minister Farrakhan says, public schools has really done a job on us in killing our motivation, our interest in learning for a lot of black people. Diseducation, Dr. Barudi's term. And I think for a lot of us, one of the ways that plays out, we don't really have an interest in reading. It's not like you're going to be reading Yurugu at school. You're going to be reading, for a lot of people, Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, Nigger Jim. That's what you're going to be reading, that sort of material. Judy Blume, Harry Potter. You're not going to be reading things that relate to you as a black person, as a non-white person, as a victim of white supremacy. You're going to be reading things that are in line with Yurugu, the racist white assili that supports a white frame of reference for viewing the world. And it really kills a lot of our motivation to want to read. And I think for a lot of us, we just don't have any interest. We haven't spent a lot of time reading. And in my view, that is a major part of the problem. I bump into people all the time who say that they love Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, they love Neely Fuller Jr. or any other warrior scholars, Amos Wilson, anyone else who's published material. And we say, oh, I really like this person, Malcolm X. And we haven't read these people's material. They've written books and we haven't read any of their material. Ida B. Wells, she's an author as well. Haven't read these people's material, or we've kind of read a chapter here, chapter there, put it down, didn't finish reading it, got caught up, lots of stuff. I know people get busy on the plantation, but I really think we have got to become a lot more serious in refining our ability to use words. We just, in my view, don't have enough respect for the power of words and language. Big part of what Dr. Marimba Ani, how she concludes this book, a big part of it. I would say that's one of the main gaps that I see with regards to white people, non-white people, white people, when they are sitting around playing Scrabble, crossword puzzles, word finds. They spend a lot of time, even their quote-unquote recreational activities are around sharpening, refining their use of words. That is no accident. That's one, I was even thinking about that. That's one of the major discrepancies that I've seen when I've been to black people's houses and white people's houses, the amount of books. Typically what I found, white people generally or often, they will have the same amount of books as many black people will have CDs. White people's book collection tends to look like a lot of black people's music collection. And I'm not saying music is a bad thing. I'm just saying I think that is a big part of the problem that explains why white people continue to dominate us. Language, words, very important. Words are tools that are used to shape, encourage, and implant ideas, thoughts, and action. Words have a huge impact on how you think. And just read an article. I saw this a couple weeks ago, and it reminded me, just in folks not, in my view, a lot of people not really doing the reading, not keeping up with the reading. It reminded me, I think this problem is probably going to get worse. You probably are going to have a generation coming along now where you've had, children who've had a cell phone since they were 6. They've been doing their text messaging and the Wii and video games and that sort of thing. It's probably going to get a lot worse if this, if racism, white supremacy continues. In my view, it's going to get worse. This article they were talking about, I suspect, white children. It's from the USA Today. It's titled, "Do Texting Tech Spell Trouble?" It reads, as the Scripps National Spelling Bee wraps up today near Washington, we're once again confronted with the annual question, in a world of spell check and letter R, letter U, there, texting, does spelling even matter anymore? Even Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney came face to face with consequences of bad spelling this week, when a user of his campaign's iPhone application noticed the phrase "a better America," and America was misspelled. By Wednesday afternoon, the campaign had fixed the flub, but the phrase had already become an internet meme. It had its own America is with Mitt Tumblr account and America Twitter hashtag. Louisa Moats, author of several textbooks about language, said good spelling in a word means credibility. If a paper or an application or report or even an email contains spelling errors, people who read it judge it harshly, she said. Research even shows that people with misspellings on job applications and resumes are less likely to get interviews. Moats and others say many public schools now give the subject short shrift in instruction. That's the shocking thing, she said. You can walk into many classrooms these days and there's no spelling program. There's no spelling book. Even if there is a spelling program, she said, it's an afterthought, and it's usually just a list of words that kids are told to go and learn. There's very little instruction in how it all works. J. Richard Gentry, an educational consultant and author of the 2004 book The Science of Spelling, said the USA's reading problem is partly a spelling problem. Across the country, we have all these fourth graders who are failing reading tests, and we've seen this pattern for about 15 years, he said. Guess what we stopped doing about 15 years ago? we pulled all the spelling books off the shelves and stopped teaching spelling, or at least we put it on the back burner. Gentry said many schools still teach spelling, but that it varies to a ridiculous degree. In many communities, he said, spelling has all but disappeared simply because it isn't tested annually on state reading exams. Gentry called spell check technology a boon to spelling education, but added it doesn't mean that it replaces the dictionary in the child's brain. Mignon Fogarty, a Reno writer who hosts the popular Grammar Girl podcast, says students these days are more likely to use the wrong word than to misspell one. Just last Tuesday, Fogarty said she came across a real estate listing that touted a home's vaulted ceilings. Spell check may be helping us spell more words properly, she said, but we're still in trouble when we don't know which of those properly spelled words to choose. End of the article. Again, it's on USA Today. Do texting tech spell trouble? My view would be, if you're seeing a lot of white people suffer from this, man, I would use the same analogy. When white people catch a cold, black people get pneumonia. If white people are having these difficulties with language, it is going to be like 20-fold, 80-fold, 1,000-fold for black people, because if you've heard Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson and many others, they're stuffing us in their special education classes. It is going to be way worse for black people, where I would say in 20 years, 30 years, you're going to have black people who have no interest and probably lacking the ability to read with a high level of comprehension a book like Yurugu. I could be wrong. Maybe it's not getting worse, but I don't see any evidence to the contrary. Proceeding. We're doing 490 to the conclusion of the book this week, wrapping things up. As I have been disappointed that people, in my view, probably haven't kept up with the reading, or they have not dialed in to share their thoughts on the reading. That I would like to check out some other books. I know a couple people had said we should do a study session on Ayi Kwei Arma, 2000 Seasons, which I would also say has been had just an incredible impact on my thinking. One of the most important books that I've read. It's on my top 5 reading list along with Yurugu. Just incredibly important book. But and even though that book is not as long, it's nowhere near as long as this book, it is also not an easy read. I'll share a quote. We'll actually get several quotes from the book as we roll. She's had a lot of them in this book, but it's not an easy read. So if people had difficulty to where they weren't able to or didn't have an interest in reading this book and keeping up, I suspect that would probably be the same for 2000 Seasons, because it's not an easy book. It's one of those books, when I read it, I could only do about 20 pages a day. And I mean, the first time I read Yurugu, I would do, 100 pages in a day, no problem. So yeah, 2000 Seasons, I think, for a book that may not even be 200 pages, I think it took me about a week and a half to read, and I was reading it every day, but it's so concentrated. There's so much insight, and just each sentence, each word almost just has such incredible meaning that, yeah, I don't know. So I'll think about it. I do want to do another book club, but I think next time it'll probably be an audio book, so people will not have to read. You can just tune in and we can listen and comment. That might be easier for people. We'll see. We'll have to wait a while before I pick up another book to do a book club. At any rate, 490 to the conclusion of the book for this week. If folks are interested in participating, the number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. We have had folks who've called in to, share their thoughts about portions that I've read, things that I've said, but that's not quite the same as having people who've read the material and are dialing in with, things that they read, questions that they had, thoughts that they had. Very different, and the latter is what I was looking for. Moving forward, I said I was disappointed. Right on. So this is on, let's see, where am I starting at today? Starting out on 4. 496. And I guess one more thought I'll get in terms of the discrepancy that I've seen between white people and the attention that they pay to language, communication skills, reading. I will say again, the first time I read this book, I didn't own my own copy. I was here in Seattle, Washington State, didn't own a copy of this book, but they had copies, multiple, plural, at the libraries here. And I will say again, they had multiple copies at the University of Washington Library in Seattle. They don't have very many black students at the University of Washington. Not very many at all. Way less than 10% of the student body is black at the University of Washington, and their student body is well over 40,000. I never met a black person there who was familiar with Dr. Marimba Ani, had read her work. Never. When I read the book, I was looking, because you can see the stamps when the book gets checked out, and I was looking, it was getting checked out, it was getting read. Who was reading this book? I used to wonder. I will say again, when I read Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972, they also had that book at the University of Washington. Again, I'd never met any black people at the University of Washington who read that book or knew who Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly was. Never. However, the first time I read it there, I did find a bookmark that said White Power, and it had a swastika on it. That right there let me know all I needed to know about who was reading these books and why they had multiple copies of these books at the University of Washington libraries. Timothy Wise, when he was on the program, he said he had read Dr. Marimba Ani's Yurugu. I am not surprised. White people end up taking a lot of time. I guess my final anecdote, I said before, alumnus, University of Virginia, my history advisor, who was a black male, he said when they quote unquote integrated UVA, they were all ready, these are black people, they were all ready to go storm the white people and demand that they get an African American literature section and that they get books on black history. They were all ready to go, demand and protest and do all this shouting. And he said they went to the library and they had racks and racks and racks of books on black people. And he said, wow, we really were misinformed. We did not understand that white people had spent a lot of time studying us. Very important lesson that I obviously have not forgotten. I would say conversely, not only have we not really invested that same amount of time in serious scholarship, we haven't really spent any time studying white people, which is why I think this book is so incredibly important. Study, serious scholarly study of white people. It's very easy, what I found, it's very easy for black people and white people. But it's very easy for black people to dismiss you when you just say, well, I think white people are racist. I think they're all racist. They don't even give you the time of day. You're just some crazy rhetoric, angry Negro. That's what you get cataloged as immediately. They don't waste 5 seconds processing what you have to say. It is much more difficult to take Dr. Marimba Ani's Yurugu and her analysis of white people. It is a lot more difficult to just dismiss that out of hand and say, oh, she's just some angry Negro. What does she know? Obviously, with this book, if you've read it, she has done a lot of research. She's quoting white people. She has studied white people and come to some very sound conclusions based on the evidence of their behavior, their conduct on this planet and in relation to black people. Conclude my anecdote there. All right, on 496. 496. This is chapter, make sure I give out the chapter 9, Progress as Ideology. One of the major themes of the book, white people always supposed to be moving towards progress. 496. The idea of progress had an irresistible attraction for Europeans. It was, after all, created out of their own sentiment, their Udumoroho. It corresponded to their Udumawazo and compromised part of the conquering mood. But it was technological efficiency that clinched it. that provided tangible evidence of material gain and accomplishment. The technological success gave Europeans the illusion of an objectively, universally valid criterion by which to judge their progress. If power over others is the ultimate and ever-present goal, and clearly technological superiority brings this kind of power, then the progress ideology that assumes lineality, change, must certainly be right. The African cyclical view of sacred time is characterized by Beard as the belief in the vicious cycle, and has certainly led to powerlessness, or so goes the European argument. The themes of European culture and ideology complement one another and converge in this way until progress becomes a cultural fact embedded in the Asili. The more particularized and hardened it becomes in the European experience, the more housed this fact must be in the language of universalism. Europeans are not like the rest of us. Their goals and ideals do not seem to work for them unless they can be conceived as universal goals. The idea of progress is nothing if it is not projected as having universal significance. Otherwise, it does not work. It must be an implicit statement of value, explicitly stated as a neutral fact. As with other aspects of the ideological matrix, progress cannot be acknowledged as value-based because the scientific highest value must be valueless. Statements, dogmas, positions, European choices can then be imposed upon the tastes of others. European predilections, tendencies, perspectives become that which is proper for all. The idea of progress pervades the European intellect, the European consciousness, as well as the European moral sense. All who succumb to it are duped by the magic by which a chosen way simultaneously becomes inevitable. Change and a European goal becomes the human goal. I am flipping. I was going to take some time to kind of expound on that to make sure people grasp what she's saying, but I think it would be better to just hear a bit more from her. I think that'll make it clear. I'm on 503, but she's still talking about this same chapter, same idea of progress. 503. This is subtitled Udumawazo, which is the worldview, the ideology, the way of thinking, the Udumaroho, which is the personality, the behavior of white people, and then progress. Udumawazo, Udumaroho, and progress. Via the idea of progress, it is possible to see how the ontological and epistemological definitions of a culture translate into its ideological aspects. The assumptions of cause, of lineality, and the sense of telos in the European Udumawazo, as well as the dependence on abstraction, are all the necessary conceptual ingredients of progress by these forms of thought. Wait a minute, sorry about that. The assumptions of cause, of lineality, and the sense of telos in the European Udumawazo, as well as the dependence on abstraction, are all necessary conceptual ingredients of progress ideology. Its assimilation depends on the mental habits encouraged by these forms of thought. Its acceptance as a predominant molder of group activity is dependent on a frame of mind already simultaneously conditioned by lineal codification and causalist epistemology. Phenomena must relate to one another within a lineally defined whole, where cause precede effects, and growth implies the incorporation and surpassing of that which has come before in a way that precludes repetition. Progress does not recur. It is triumph over past. The need for and feeling of triumph is an essential ingredient in the idea of progress. In this view, life is a continuous struggle based on competition, and meaning is derived from winning. Hidden behind the so-called universalism and humanism of the concept are the exigencies of an Utamoroho that feeds on subjugation, surpassing, conquering, winning. Progress means we are winning. We have triumphed. The enemy is vaguely felt, not conceived, to be everything else out there. Not only nature, but other people, other ways, ideas, forces, beings. The enemy against the European competes is everything he or she is not. The idea involves continual movement because the enemy is never totally subdued. She seeks to close the gap, and we must stay ahead of her. Progress is staying ahead. It is defeating the present. Moving forward, I will kind of stop to give my thoughts to synthesize all of this, but I think it would be best to hear a bit more of her explain all this. So now I'm on 508. I'm going to read 508 to top of 509. Same chapter, Progress as Ideology. The ideology of progress allowed Europeans to speak with impunity of uncivilized and superior races in the 19th century and modern nations. Europeans have no resources of their own, but in their view, they have the expertise and the drive that allows them to make proper use of the resources of others. Colonialism and neocolonialism in Africa, South African apartheid, white dominance in Zimbabwe, American treatment of Native Americans, Jewish settlers on the Gaza Strip, the existence of Israel in the land of Palestinians, are all part of one culture, one movement, one ideology that expresses the attitude, this place was nothing before we came here. Woo! Great paragraph. The ideology of progress vindicates this white attitude towards our resources and our political integrity. Euro-Caucasians the world over can never honestly condemn white control in South Africa, since to them the whites have brought progress. Even Marxian theory understands colonialism as having helped to progress Africans from feudalism to capitalism. Necessary lineal progression towards eventual communist revolution. Here again we have the assumption of the European Udumawazo. But while for Marx, progress stops with the achievement of the communist state, the ideology of progress says that progress is never totally possessed. It is a never-ending process. Civilization and progress are synonyms in this ideology. Both are supposed blessings of the European. While Europeans civilize us, they also bring God to us. For us to want to be civilized, to find God, is to want to progress toward being white. We accept the ideology that supports our exploitation. We participate in our own oppression. Myths are a crucial aspect of self-determination and development, but they are culture-bound. African myths must explain to African people why and how we are a great people. When majority peoples accept the mythology of European progress, we are accepting a system of myths and symbols that explain us negatively. This is because no single concept represents the asili of European culture as fundamentally as the idea of progress. It is fundamental because of its ideological strength. 509, I'm skipping a little bit to 509. In the final analysis, European progress brings economic profit and political and cultural power. Since this is obviously the case, the question becomes, why should Africans and other majority peoples embrace the European ideology of progress? Question. Europeans have been able to convince us that we are in a quote-unquote race. We enter the race somehow not realizing that by its very definition, its locus of control, and the nature of its organization, we, non-white people, can never win. We are losers even before we start, since the rules are defined by those who need our resources in order to win. We are afraid to remain distant, to refuse the terms defined by our enemies. We are afraid to organize our own race in which we set the rules. We never question the degree to which European progress carries with it the accoutrements of capitalist Christian Europeanism, white supremacy. We assume that the decadence of Europe, its crime-filled, drug-laden cities in which, because of spiritual retardation, disintegrated families, and the negative images produced by a capitalist media, alienated children are forced into prostitution, is a natural byproduct of progress. Africans colonized in America are told that progress for them means buying into the American system. Black Americans must be part of the great technological revolution in order to advance. Ronald Reagan, Tuskegee Convocation, May 10, 1987. But our hope lies in those critical young Africans who have the intelligence and creativity to ask the African-centered question: progress, advance towards what? It's pretty much the end of chapter 9, which I think gives a great summary of progress. And if you want to think of it in one term, there are many, but if you want to think of this whole idea of progress and how laced this entire idea is with white supremacy, when they use the term developed, right? The developed world or the developed nation, it implies that non-white areas, because generally when they talk about developed, they talk about areas that are filled with white people, right? United States, England, France, Switzerland, those are generally the areas that they're talking about when they talk about quote-unquote developed areas. When they talk about underdeveloped, third world, they're always talking about areas with a lot of dark people. Haiti, anywhere on the continent of Africa. Those are the places that they're talking about. And just that right there, laced with racism, white supremacy, right? The terms in and of itself, unless you recognize, and I think that is a huge value of this work, unless you recognize that these terms are political, these terms have an implied value. Who wants to be underdeveloped, right? I mean, you don't even think about it. If you're 11, 12, 13, 14, for many, a lot of 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. If you don't have an understanding of racism, white supremacy, if you don't have an understanding of white people, you just process that, develop. Hey, I want to develop. Who's against development, right? It suggests improvement, things being better. Who wants to be underdeveloped? If we're in a quote-unquote race, I don't want to be third. I don't even be part of the third world. I want to be first. I want to be number one. Everything about the way that language and words are structured, they have been structured in such a way to influence the way that you think to support the system of white supremacy. And that idea of progress, just questions. Progress towards what? Great way to conclude the chapter. Progress towards what? What direction are we moving? So we can have cities like you all, where we have all this pollution and crowding and terrible schools. Is that what we want? Is that what we want to replicate worldwide, so we can have everything set up just the way that white people have, as though they have set the template that everybody else should model? Real important concept. And there are more examples, I'm sure. I'll double check just to see if there are questions. I'll give out the number again as we roll. 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. If you have questions, it's *6. If you don't understand something that's been read, you can let me know. But if you haven't done the reading and you're just, interested in bringing up, randomness, we can kind of save that. I'll save some time later on for that. But if you haven't really done the reading and you're just bringing up stuff that's not related to what we're talking about here and this particular section of the book, if you don't have questions specifically about the book and the text, we'll save that for later just to kind of stay on task. Get out another one of my rants. I had notes for my rants about the reading. Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro, for folks if you all want to support our guest, Mr. Khalifa. He was on the broadcast, and he was talking about trying to sell some of Carter G. Woodson's book, Miseducation of the Negro. Definitely support his efforts. The website, black-e-books.com, black-e-books.com. Support his efforts. You can get a copy of Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. But Woodson, as well as E. Franklin Frazier, a very important book, both of those, but E. Franklin Frazier, Black Bourgeoisie, which is also on my top 10, phenomenal book. Both of those books talk about the fact, and this is not new. Miseducation of the Negro is 100 years old at this point, and Black Bourgeoisie is about 60 years old at this point. Maybe not 60. It came out in the late 50s, so yeah, I guess it is about 60 years old at this point. They both talk about how black people were not reading. E. Franklin Frazier, he even talks about that he was seeing some of the same thing that I and some other non-white people have observed. We are having black people who have these books, but they haven't read them. Same thing that I'm seeing now. People have Dr. Welsing's book, or they've seen some YouTube videos. They haven't read the material. And I've heard Mr. Fuller say that you can't really grasp codification just listening to him talk for a while. You really have to do some serious study. And that's one thing that I can say about Dr. Marimba Ani, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller Jr. They are avaricious readers. And I mean, really, with all of these folks. But I noted it with Mr. Fuller. I was talking to him, and he was just dropping books left and right. It really came across that he has spent a lot of time studying Dr. Kamal Kanban as well. You heard him in the audio clip at the beginning. He is always recommending books and referencing different books and articles and journals and collecting material. Reading is incredibly important. Am I saying, if you go and read 20, 30, 40 books, that you are going to have no more problems, that you will have a total overstanding of racism, white supremacy? Absolutely not. But I am saying, I think if more of us sat down and did some serious reading, I'm not talking about fluff and just reading Harry Potter or, whatever the case may be, Elin Harris or whatever the other stuff is, some serious reading, I think that would begin to improve some of our communication and language difficulties. And I think the more attention you pay to words and language, I think the more you will see racism, white supremacy. I've also noted, and I'll get back to the text, but I have noted consistently some of the white people who have offered some pretty interesting observations on racism, white supremacy. They are English teachers. The degree to which you start really paying attention to language, the racism, white supremacy will be glaring. You will see how the entire language has been structured to support racism, white supremacy. That's one of the reasons that I really enjoy speaking with Dr. Martin Kevorkian, and I think that's why he's able to pick out so many different aspects of film and how non-white people are always dehumanized in these different films. And when they're talking about Terminator or any film that is about robots taking over or some non-human form taking over, that they're talking about black people. He has a doctorate in English, and I've seen that consistently. At any rate, moving forward. Chapter 10, language, right on time. Language, chapter 10, and it starts with the quote from Wade Nobles, Black warrior scholar. Power is the ability to define reality and have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. That, incredible sentence. I'll say it again. Power is the ability to define reality and have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. No one does that better than racist man, racist woman, racist child. And what he's talking about is just words, the use of words to condition how people think, to where it even becomes instinctual. You haven't even stopped to say, well, wait a minute, where did I get this idea from? Why am I talking this way? Good hair, that's another one. I think Pam references that consistently, and watching that you're not saying that around your children. Where did I get that way of thinking that this, quote unquote, whatever image you have in your mind, they're certainly not going to be a dark complexion person. Where did I get that idea from? Just words. When that gets tossed around and picked up, and no one even stops to question where that came from. Words, words, words. Language has a huge impact on how we think, speak, and act, and most of the time it is on an unconscious, subconscious level. We really do not consciously process all of the words and terms that we're using. I think that's why so many people on the program who say that they listen to the cows will still be using the term fair. Not really paying attention of all the words. I mean, we're bombarded with words and ideas all the time, images. You don't really consciously process all that stuff, but your brain computer is extremely powerful. Those images, those words, those concepts, they get in and they contaminate your brain computer, even if it is on a subconscious level. She says that earlier in the book. The city is media. Talked about that earlier. Who's the fairest of them all? Just having that commercial be on for 30 seconds. You're watching TV, not reading Yurugu, watching TV, and you see the trailer for Snow White. That has an impact. Charlize Theron, boop, has a huge impact. Chapter 10, Universalism, the Syntax of Cultural Imperialism. Let's see, we will skip to page 512. Bottom of 512, second to last paragraph. I'm going to get water before I read, pardon. By camouflaging European political interest as universal human goals, Europeans disarm the victims of their imperialism. Culturally inspired flames of resistance to European aggression are extinguished by a sea of universalistic rhetoric. In quotes, we are seeking the good of humankind while you are acting merely to further the ends of a narrowly defined nationalism, in quotes, reminding me of the television series that has popped up consistently, where they say we are of peace always. Consistent rhetoric of white people. The same thing that they say when they are going to bomb and kill non-white people in Iraq or Libya or anywhere, Afghanistan. Democracy, we're coming to restore democracy and the same ideals that we espouse here. Always of peace, always of democracy, nothing. Rhetoric. The circle is indeed a vicious one, for the more successfully European culture is imposed on majority cultures, non-white people, the more convincing becomes the rhetoric, until we, first world intellectuals, European trained, struggle also to represent not our own, but the universal humanitarian interest, which of course has already been defined in terms of European value. We find it unintelligent to talk in terms of race. An example of how this works can be demonstrated by a common contemporary use of the European value dichotomy of abstract good and concrete bad. African black children, it is said, are severely handicapped in that they tend to think only in concrete terms and are generally unable to think abstractly. An unfortunate reaction among people of African descent is to seek to prove that African black children can think just as abstractly as white children, but they are jumping the gun, for the following questions have not been asked. What does it mean to think abstractly? What value does it have, if in fact people do think abstractly? What does it mean in terms of the interest of white society? When the charge is made, one could conceivably ask, what kind of abstraction? If European values are assumed, then one has no choice but to become as European as they, for they are most certainly the best, in quotes. Very important segment. And again, language, the whole chapter, language. They have structured the way we think, the way that we use words to support racism, white supremacy, to support the degradation of non-white people, especially black people. Skipping ahead to 524. This is a great case study. I might read most of this on 524. Great case study. I'll double check, make sure. If the audio is not clear, let me know. You can write in the chat room or what have you if there are any audio issues as I'm reading. I don't want to be reading and not be clear, so people can't really understand what's being said. I'm outside today, thank goodness, and will be outside for the foreseeable future. Summer has finally arrived in the Pacific Northwest. It has been ridiculously cold. I have been cursing about the weather for months. It hasn't been sunny. I guess to put it in perspective, I haven't really made any mention. There's supposedly a heat wave that's been going across the United States, this area of the world, that has totally missed this area of the world. It has been cold. And when I say cold, you have been able to see your breath at night like every day. I don't think it's been above 70 degrees in the past week, 2 weeks maybe. It may have been longer than that. Like, it has been very poor weather. I don't think it's been over 70 degrees until Wednesday. I don't think it had been over 70 degrees for easily 2 weeks. We were still getting weather in the 40s at night. It was ridiculous. I hadn't even worn my shirt because it was cold. I had to have a sweatshirt on every day. That's why I had made no mention at all of the supposed heat wave. I've been wearing a sweatshirt and winter cap for the past 2 weeks. It's been cold, rainy. I hate the weather here, but summer has finally arrived. It's supposed to be like upper 70s and 80s for the next week and a half or so. I'm loving it. The weather is finally nice, so I will be outside doing all the programs. But if the weather is a problem, let me know and I'll try to monitor that. But yeah, I'm definitely got to take advantage because I don't expect this to last too long. I do see a hand. I'll check the lines before I continue reading. Skype caller, do you have questions, comments?
Hi. I just wanted to read a small portion on page 513 before we jump to 524. And on 513 it says, sorry, let me shut the fan off. There is only one way to break the hold, and that is to be able to recognize the phenomenon of European cultural imperialism, no matter what form it takes. Our objective is to make the subtle manifestation of European cultural nationalism more easily discernible. I think that's a very important piece to me because I think that's the basics of which non-white people have a hard time deciphering, if you understand what I mean.
That is the very next paragraph, what I was just reading about black children not being able to think abstractly. She was right in line. Absolutely. I could not agree more. Absolutely. I had contemplated whether I should have kept reading, but I kept reading. I'm glad I didn't. Yeah, I could not agree more. We have to be able to recognize, I think she says consistently in the book, white people, their political objective of white terrorism is always in effect. They never go into any area of people activity, any endeavor without that objective, that political objective of make sure we maintain white supremacy, regardless, everything that they do. And until we recognize that, we're going to continue to be suffering, struggling with the same problems that we've been dealing with for centuries. Absolutely agree.
Then the next, for the small portion, says on 513, the early Christian formulation exemplifies the function of European imperialism. While it is projected as a world religion fashioned for the salvation of all people, regardless of their cultural origins, it is in fact interpreted as a mandate for the spread of European culture and European control. Then on page 514, I'm in the first paragraph towards the end where it says, it is becoming more and more obvious that it is becoming more and more obvious that to neutralize the effect of the universalistic rhetoric, one need merely reject the universal as a viable goal, thereby eliminating the force of the rhetoric of European ideology. And Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And this goes in regards to page 517 regarding the European changing its ways, if possible. In regards to the European asili, it says on the first paragraph on page 517 towards the end, change would have to occur at the most fundamental level, the level of the asili. We are talking about destruction. My suspicion is that neither Marquette nor the phenomenologists are ready for anything that drastic, meaning white people in general are not going to change their asili. They're not going to change the fundamental level and core of their asili, and I don't think their behavior is going to change whatsoever.
That's right. I totally agree. That's I didn't touch on it. I felt it would make better sense to wait until it comes up in the book. The sound clip at the beginning, I played a little bit from Dr. Martin Luther King and the I Have a Dream speech from August 1963, and then segued to his final speech the day before he was murdered, assassinated in 1968, where he was talking about our sick white brothers. And when Dr. Kanban, when he says that he feels that that is a extremely important sentence, comment from Dr. King, in realizing, at least suggesting to Dr. Kanban and myself, I agree with his assessment, that that sentence suggests that in the 5-year time span from his I Have a Dream speech in D.C. to him being in Memphis and talking about our sick white brothers, that he had come to a deeper understanding about white people and their commitment to racism, white supremacy, and that he realized this was worse than what he originally thought. And I think for a lot of us, we have that confusion about what it means to be a white person and thinking that they can be rehabilitated. I think you heard him in the speech and said, we can't think that all white people are racist and we don't want any hate of white people. Just not really having a clear understanding of what it means to be a white person and thinking that it's possible for them to change and alter their behavior. Again, I think we're going to be just going through the same motions, the same frustrations, the same heartache, century after century, unless we come to a deeper understanding about what it means to be a white person. And I think this book will go a long way towards producing that better understanding.
I agree. So I'll yield the floor back to you to page 524.
And there was another caller, 8225. Did you have any thoughts on what our female caller just shared, or anything else you wanted to touch on?
I missed the first part of what she was saying just because I was dialing in with my question. But one sentence, at least in regard to progress, I took from 509, says, progress is a secularized statement of the Christian mythology of saving the world, which I thought was something real nice, because people are familiar with that concept and the fallacy of that. So, and I also, going to the end of what she was saying, I summarized what she's saying on 519 by basically thinking that blacks and whites don't have the same interests. Whites want to keep black bodies and resources. Blacks want their bodies and resources back. These two positions conflict. So, out of necessity, black justice is white loss. And that's just what it is. I'll leave it there.
That sentence on 509 that you read, We're talking about progress. Progress is the secularized statement of the Christian mythology of saving the world. Excellent, kind of concise statement of just a really important point. It reminded me of Mr. Fuller. I've heard him talk about, he was talking about Hurricane Katrina, but this is replayed over and over again. And he was saying they had all these pictures of black people on their rooftops and struggling and just couldn't do anything, couldn't even save themselves. And these white guys coming in on helicopters, Sean Penn and other white people coming in to save the day. And he said there were probably more pictures of black people, destitute black people on their rooftops or huddles or whatever else, and white people swooping in to save them than anything else. And he said that reinforces that whole white savior mythology, that nothing good is going to happen unless white people arrive. I think that's it is equating white people with progress. Nothing good is going to happen unless white people show up. Our lives will not be saved. We will not make any improvements in our quality of existence on the planet unless some white people show up to help us do this. If there are no white people, we're just going to be struggling and poor and in hell. Haiti, he was saying, same thing with Haiti. So yeah, I think that is a great sentence to make it concise and to the point what she's saying. Right on. Unless either of our callers, unless they have anything else they want to touch on at this point, we'll move forward. I will again take a moment, since this is our final study session on Yurugu, get my gripe in again before I continue on 524. If we had more people that were doing the reading, we would have had this by like 3, 4, 8 other people who had read the book and kind of sharing ideas, different things that they read and thought were important, different ideas. I think it would have been much more constructive for all, and my level of interest would have been much higher, and I would have been looking forward to picking the next book to do this. But since we didn't get that level of participation, I'm a lot less interested in doing the book clubs, unless I have an audiobook, and I do have some audiobooks that would be cool. See how that rolls. But yeah, the level of dedication to reading is not so cool right now. Anywho, on 524, see here, I'll double check with you all, the folks that dialed in. I'll double check your lines once we conclude. I think this is a great case study, political function of quote-unquote objectivity. That's also been a running theme in the book, so-called objectivity, and saying that white people are objective and scientific, and that they do not have a political bent, or their perspective or their conclusions are not biased towards any of their personal feelings about whatever it is that they're studying. And that is totally incorrect. It would be false for anyone, including Dr. Ani. She says, very beginning of the book, this is political. I am making no claim to objectivity. I am a black person, and the purpose of this book is to combat the system of white supremacy. She's very clear about that, very upfront from the very beginning, as am I. And I think every person, I wouldn't care who they are, white person or non-white person, you're going to have some sort of political view about whatever it is that you're doing. You're not going to be objective. I think it's best to just go ahead and state whatever your objectives, whatever your view is, so that people know that up front, and then they can make whatever evaluations of your presentation with the fact in mind that, okay, this person has this particular perspective. They have this particular political orientation, which is influencing what it is that they're talking about or researching or suggesting. This is on, as I said, 524. The callers, I'll double check their lines once we get done with this. I'll try and share, because I thought this was just great example. And again, words, so important, words. 524, top of the page, the political function of objectivity. The myth of objectivity and the use of the methodology of objectification, scientism, is one aspect of universalism as an expression of the European Ultima Rojo, and as a tool of Western cultural imperialism, by offering an ethnographic example from contemporary European Euro-American society, I can demonstrate how this works. In 1970, the African and African American members of the African Studies Association challenged the work of the then 12-year-old organization as being fundamentally invalid and illegitimate. The ASA represented the American academic establishment. Its members were mainly from the socioeconomic middle stratum of the white colonial minority. Just as Maquette describes the existential situation of the European anthropologist abroad, the dissenters said that instead of furthering Euro-American white supremacist interests in Africa, the study of African life should be undertaken from a Pan-Africanist perspective. These Pan-Africanists acknowledged their own perspective and wanted it and their participation to influence the ideological thrust of the activities and work of the African Studies Association. In an article entitled Confrontation at Montreal, Professor John Henrik Clarke said, "African peoples will no longer permit our people to be raped culturally, economically, politically, and intellectually, merely to provide European scholars with intellectual status, symbols of African artifacts hanging in their living rooms, and irrelevant and injurious lectures in their classrooms. We suspect that this is a new area of academic colonialism, and that it is not unrelated to the neo-colonialism that is attempting to re-enslave Africa by controlling the minds of African people." The group argued that scholarship was indeed political in its conclusions and uses. They stated their perspective and ideological commitments openly and said the political interest of the African peoples should determine the character of African studies. The group rejected the offer of token representation made by ASA and under the leadership of John Henrik Clarke, James Turner, Chike Onwuachi, and others. The African Heritage Studies Association split irrevocably with the ASA. Now let us look briefly at the method of counter-argument used by their opponents. In an article entitled Politics and Scholarship, published in the ASA journal, African Studies Review, Benjamin Niemer begins patronizingly by saying that two good goals are in collision in African studies in the United States: the fostering of certain black interests and the untrammeled pursuit of scholarship. The word certain is a signpost signaling the limitations of the Pan-African position, while scholarship represents the universal and therefore that which is valued. This meant that the Pan-Africanists were opposing scholarship, an indefensible position. Like science and progress or truth, scholarship is something no one wants to tamper with. Who among us, after all, wants to interfere with the pursuit of science, or with the course of progress on which it takes us? We are encouraged to perceive these to be universal pursuits, not particular or parochial, like Pan-African self-determination. There is no question in Niemer's mind as to who will survive the collision. Niemer continues, untrammeled scholarly inquiry is recognized as rational inquiry in pursuit of truth, and very few people are in principle against the pursuit of truth. Of course not, because the pursuit of truth, in quotes, is nothing but a meaningless abstraction, a rhetorical phrase used to cloud issues, not clarify them. Niemer's article is riddled with these kinds of abstractions, which, interestingly enough, are designed to appeal to the emotions of his audience, the metaphysical pathos, lovejoy of the European tradition, while pretending to appeal to reason only. By using these terms, he succeeds in erecting a wall of rhetorical disinterest designed to disarm the avowed African nationalist who is admittedly politically and ideologically motivated. But the demystification of the syntax of universalism can prevent us from being intimidated by such terms. We must demand that the writer concretize his abstractions and put meaningful content into them. What exactly is untrammeled scholarship? Whose truth? Certainly, Niemer would not accept Fanon's definition of truth. Cowbell. Truth is the property of the national cause. Truth is that which hurries on the breakup of the colonialist regime. It is that which promotes the emergence of the nation. It is all that protects the natives and ruins the foreigners. Niemer says that the call for African control can be constructed as advocating an undesirable means to justice and the implantation not of truth rationally arrived at, but of dogma. He cannot quarrel with the quest of African Americans for justice without embarrassing his own community of liberal academics, but he can condemn their method of pursuing it. His own method assures that his argument is not dogmatic. The position is a familiar echo from the days of the Southern student movement of the 60s. Basically, Niemer is concerned that he and others like him might lose their access to Africa and their control of the character of African studies, but his argument cannot be stated in terms of parochial interest. It would lose all its force. He must argue in terms of universalism. He must claim his concern to be that of African studies, continue to represent truth rationally arrived at, which means you must play by our rules. The position of the Pan-Africanist doesn't have the hypocritical bent characteristic of European rhetoric. They are concerned that African studies represent an African perspective, and they say so. The value of European ideology are discernible in Niemer's argument once we have become adept at recognizing them through the use of the Asili concept. He says that some people argue that political or social objectives should be primary, and that although those espousing this position are often considered to represent quote-unquote radical political interests, they can be called reactionaries because, if successful, they would take men back to the time before they attained the level of civilization which entails respect for a disciplined search for rational truth. All of that is in quotes. The entire force of the Western European worldview, the presuppositions of the European Udumawazo, as well as the themes of European ideology, are behind this statement. The trick is to deal with it in just that way, as though it represented nothing more than European commitment as opposed to universality, on which the force and success of Niemer's argument depends. It is the political effect of the objectivity argument that is of paramount importance, and this is the reason Niemer insists that in spite of the fact that objective truth may be unattainable, it is still a standard to be set. Niemer's argument proceeds this way. If the notion of truth has practical meaning, and if scholarship is the search for rational truth, then untrammeled scholarly inquiry is necessary for the good of society. It is unnecessary to say that this means scholarly inquiry untrammeled by Pan-Africanism. His argument continues in a very Platonic vein. The good of society is justice, in quotes, for all its members and cultivation of human excellence. Therefore, from the standpoint of the good society, whose politics consists of such an ordering of human relations as will maximize the cultivation of human excellence, untrammeled scholarship is politically good. With this view of the good society, scholarship cannot be subordinated to other goals. Scholarship is good in and of itself, a goal to which we can aspire. It is a basis for judgment. It is for this reason that scholarship should be autonomous from political action in our present world. In quotes, and she says, Dr. Ani, this is scientism at its best. In other words, scholarship, like religion, is unquestioned, and so its methodology becomes ideology. Niemer is really saying, how dare these Africans question our authority? Failures, says Niemer, are individual failures. But the point made by the African dissenters was that the ideological commitment and cultural environment of the Western European scholar in Africa has, indeed, been responsible for specific kinds of failures, most probably those which, from Niemer's perspective, would not be recognized as such. The essential thrust of Niemer's statement is counter to that of Jacques Maquet and Kathleen Go-Aberle. Maquet insists on the relevance of the anthropologist's existential situation, while Aberle points to the fact that anthropologists were of higher social status than their informants. They were usually of the dominant race, white people, and were protected by imperial law. Of course, it is, in one sense, the individual who fails, but the perspective of the individual is most certainly influenced by her culture. And while others may come to realize that ideas are culturally mediated, Niemer must hold fast to the belief that certain epistemological methodologies ensure purity and guarantee that scholarship is not contaminated by group interest. He must similarly avoid concrete and stick to the abstractions that merely indicate the syntax of European argument. His article is a good example of European cultural imperialism as manifested in the rubric of European scholarship. The tacit pivotal issues in Niemer's argument can be stated in terms of objectivity, good, versus subjectivity, bad, individualism, good, nationalism, bad, where individualism is ironically transformed into universalism. Stanley Diamond, in speaking of the objectification of cultural relativism, has stated this process in reverse. Participation in all cultures is scientifically justified as equivalent to participation in none. If we moved the circle in the other direction, individualism is understood to represent the lack of specific group interest and therefore to represent the interests of all people. This is a fallacy predicated on mistaken assumptions, but it is habitually used to project European commitment as universal disinterest. This example demonstrates the way in which the myth of objective scholarship allows Europeans to claim universality, which in turn represents the good, syntactically in terms of their values and their epistemology. In addition, objective scholarship serves to camouflage the proselytization of their own nationalistic interests. It also allows us to see concretely how the Platonic use of the methodology of objectification still works, these many centuries hence. Once we have understood the nature of the European asili, i.e., as the facade of scientific argumentation, disintegrates under scrutiny, European nationalism will be exposed. The illusion of objectification in social science facilitates the creation and encouragement of whatever social order to which the theorist is committed. The Platonic epistemology was one aspect. Once his epistemological definitions were accepted as being eternally and universally correct, then the Republic, which corresponded to them and which was their material and ideological embodiment, had also to be accepted. Through this, the efforts of St. Simon and others by which the illusion of objectification was made part of the definition of a nascent social science, European ideology, European cultural forms, and European value could be projected as having universal validity. With this realization, arguments that demonstrate the non-validity of the methodology of objectification become ammunition in the battle against the objectives of European nationalism. Put simply, in the context of European ideology, objectification becomes a means of claiming universality where there is none. European cultural imperialism is therefore, that is the end of the case study that she presents. That example, I think, is so important for so many reasons. It reminded me of Timothy Wise and some of these other white people who allege to be working against racism. Hey, I think, I don't really see any difference between you and the white people who are racist, or white people who don't try to pretend that they are not racist. I don't see any difference between you and them. What they will try to do to subvert those allegations, when non-white people start to become less confang, were very similar to what Timothy Wise, Don't Drink the Kool-Aid, was saying. When I got disconnected, I should be back live, got disconnected. I think I had completed the passage, and I was just giving my thoughts. Thank you all for the Maydays. All good. Okay. I was saying as I got disconnected that this case study, I think, is very important. It reminds me of what some of what racist man, racist woman, racist child who try to pretend that they are not racist, that they are working against white supremacy. It reminds me of them. When you call them out and say, well, I don't really see a difference between you and, David Duke and the rest of the white people who, are just explicit and say that they're down with racism. What they will do to counter those attacks. And it reminded me specifically of Timothy Don't Drink the Kool-Aid when he was on the program for the final time in July of 2010, 2 years ago, man. When he was on the program, and I made a request. I had asked him some months before. I said, when you go out, anytime that you speak, tell non-white people, hey, I am a white man. I am a racist, white supremacist. And regardless of what I say, you should think above and beyond anything else that my primary objective is the maintenance of racism, white supremacy. And I asked him to say that anytime he goes out to speak, anytime that it might even be remotely possible for a non-white person to hear him. And he said, well, I think the statement is flawed. And I said, well, hey, what's incorrect about the statement? He had already admitted to being a racist, and I gave my definition for racist. He admitted, yes, that's true. By that definition, I would be a racist white supremacist. And he said, well, I don't think people respond to those sorts of dogmas and blah, 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 and just buckets and buckets of words. Hang on, Timothy. What's incorrect about the statement? And we never get around to it. All we get is, oh, well, it's dogma this, and I don't think people respond that well to those sorts of chants and what have you, and people just don't we weren't talking about how people respond to it. You said the statement was flawed. What's incorrect about the statement? And I never heard that. And that's where we ended at. It reminded me of that and claims that I've heard from other white people who say that they are against racism, white supremacy when they get called. Anytime it's a white person and they get called, hey, we suspect that you are practicing white supremacy, racism, what they will try to do. I'm in the interest of universal brotherhood, mankind, and, you all are just on some sort of vendetta and you're just filled with hatred. I've heard this over and over and over and over. When I first started, when we got kicked off the air in 2007, and Matthew Hamilton, suspected racist, cowbell would be ringing. This white guy is in a group called Asians Against White Supremacy. That's the name of the group. And we talked about this before. We had one of the non-white females who was a part of this group on the program and one of the non-white males. And he's in a sexual relationship with a non-white female. And we're talking, and I'm saying, I don't think that's correct. I'm giving the logic. And he agrees. He said, the logic, yeah, I see what you're saying. But, you're an ideologue, and you're not making space for us to, white people and non-white people, to meet and just be human beings and just to express ourselves and all this yada universal foolishness. And I'm just like, what you're saying, it makes absolute no sense at all. We're in a system of white supremacy. I don't know if there's some space. I don't know what you're talking about in terms of white people, non-white people being able to come together and there not be racism, white supremacy present. I don't know where that environment is. I don't know where that location is. I don't suspect it exists. And I think you're just trying to justify your incorrect behavior in sexually trashing another victim. I've heard this same foolishness from white people, and it just becomes very apparent. They always try to make it seem as though they don't have a white supremacist agenda, that they're just in for brotherhood and sisterhood amongst everyone. And if you're a non-white person and you take any sort of stance against white people, that you are just behaving just like the racist. I've heard that over and over. And Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. even said that. He's a victim, but cowbell would be ringing again. He said the same thing when I raised my concerns about not having sex with white people. Oh, well, you're behaving just like the segregationists. You're doing the same thing that they are. Confusion. Don't fall for it. White people are very skilled at presenting themselves as though they don't have any sort of agenda other than justice, democracy, humanity, universal. They are very skilled at a lot of flowery words, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They are phenomenal at that sort of presentation. It's not true at all, and all you have to do is look at their behavior. Don't get caught up in all the words and pages and pages and pages and speeches. Don't get caught up in all that. Just look at their behavior. The contradictions will be glaring. Real important section, I thought, just in breaking down the way that they will try to use terms to make it seem as though you, if you're a non-white person and you oppose what racist man, racist woman, racist child are doing, as though you are the one that is blocking the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of truth. You are doing something incorrect, not the white people. We are always of truth, justice, the American way. Get out of here. Let's see. I'll double check. I should be back and connected without any issues now. I'll double check to see if any of the folks that dialed in, if they had any comments before we proceed. Caller 8225, your line should be open.
Just listening, but I had a note basically to the effect of saying, and I forget where basically that they present themselves as, here it is. European culture through universalism is able to project itself consistently as superior to others and yet normative for them. Which, it can't be the standard, quote unquote, and they're the best. Either they're normal, quote unquote, or they're the best, but they can't be the standard. I thought that was interesting. And you pretty much, in your long reading, said a lot of the quotes that I had written down. Let's see. Another one. Let's see where I can pick up. Inevitably, she says on 532, or Marcel Griot makes the point of their scientism and rationalism inevitably leading to organized happiness, which is a term that I thought, summed it up pretty good. That doesn't really work. Happiness doesn't work in an organized fashion, I don't think. But go ahead. Maybe it does, actually.
Oh, I see it. It's on 530, I guess the top of 533. This is no doubt due to the fact that the European and the American too, even when he got rid of his superiority complex with regard to colored people, cannot abandon his devout attitude to science, regarded on the one hand as the prerogative of his culture and on the other as an entity outside mankind with a life of its own, blindly subjecting stars and infusoria alike to its laws and inevitably leading to organized happiness. That's all a quote from Marcel Griot. Hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yeah, I would just evaluate. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Number one, what do you mean when you say happiness? That would be question number one. And then I would just encourage folks to just take an observation of white people and folks that are doing what they do, and see if the end result is people being quote unquote happy. What I'm seeing is Jerry Sandusky and Larry Brinken and Jeffrey Dahmer, and lots of misery and suffering, and people having lots and lots of problems and not feeling safe and feeling that things are getting worse. That is what I'm seeing, but, I could be incorrect. I believe our Skype caller, she switched over. Your line should be open as well.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, yes. On page 527, when you were talking about Niemer's argument regarding the terms of objectivity as good versus subjectivity as bad, and individualism as good versus nationalism as bad, what I find interesting in terms of Europeans, they like you said, like the book says, they profess to want objectivity and individualism, yet they themselves as a group is operating under subjectivity and nationalism, which they classify as bad. Therefore, that in of itself is, again, rhetoric. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. I think our male caller, I think he was raising a similar point when he was saying that you can't be normative and the best. Like, it can't be we're universal and everyone should be striving to do the same thing, but we're better than everybody else. Like, we're all doing the same thing, but we're just better than everybody else. And it can't be we're all supposed to be universal and we're all supposed to be a part of this brotherhood, but then, well, wait a minute, we're a little bit better than everybody else. And I think you see that consistently with white people worldwide, that they do not get down like that at all anywhere on the planet. As much as they talk about that, that's not the way that they function at all. It's that rhetorical ethic, which is, I just think, is a phenomenal concept, where they consistently get that idea out to make everybody else, which is another reason. That's why I started with that quote from Dr. King, not to disparage him at all. He's a victim of racism. He died fighting against white supremacy racism. But that quote, striving for that universal brotherhood, where we can all sit down, and he had a lot of metaphors, which he calls those abstractions. They're just metaphors. When you're making all these comparisons, let justice roll down like a stream, that is an abstraction, right? That's the same thing where she's pointing out with Niemer, where he's got all these abstractions, these metaphors, the untrammeled pursuit of truth and scholarship. These are just a lot of metaphors, and I have found white people are very good at using these sort of odd metaphors, right, to get you. And I think she says that in the quote, where they appeal to your emotion. They manipulate the way that you think, the way that you feel, and it short circuits your logic. They sound nice and they get you emotionally riled up in support of what they're doing. But if you really stop and think about it, it's not a concrete, clear expression of what it is that they're talking about. Justice hasn't really been defined when you just say it's rolling down the hills. True scholarship hasn't really been defined when you're saying untrammeled pursuit of scholarship. And you really got to be on your toes with white people when you're talking about racism, because they will be bursting out of the seams with these sorts of metaphors. But yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think white people, they really excel in getting people to not think in nationalistic terms to work against white people, while they excel in terms of white nationalism and thinking as a coherent army against everybody else.
Did you guys read from page 534 yet?
I didn't.
Okay. On page 534, I'm going to go to the first paragraph, and I'm going to just jump to the main point that I have highlighted. I have the nature of the European asili is to seek power over other. Other is that which presents itself as threatening because it is not controlled from the European center. The need to obliterate different issues from European xenophobia, the same need to maintain difference of the status so that they can be other, that the self can control. Here we have the formula for the creation of power. In the European Asili, cultural expression and cultural aggression become synonymous. So the fact that there is an other that is not European is a threat because it's something that cannot be controlled from the European center, yet their very Asili demands the creation of another so that they can control, that their self, their Asili can control. So I thought that was very important. And in the second paragraph it says, I'm going to jump just to what I have highlighted, nationalism is the love of a people for themselves and their commitment to their group survival. It is the affirmation of the cultural self. It is what motivates the pockets of resistance to European oppression. European nationalism, on the other hand, has met what Ariely describes as the character of the Protestant nationalism, i.e. the mandate to universally impose its European ideas. When I thought about that, I think of like different other cultural groups that are not white or classified as white. The reason why they come to the United States, for example, and maintain their culture because they know that their culture itself function as, you could say, an antivirus software, and is fighting off the virus that's trying to seep into their operating system or into the motherboard or the logic board, which is the European imperialism cultural ceiling, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Makes a lot of sense, I think. A lot of sense. That reminded me when Dr. Kamban, his most recent visit on the program, you can visit his website, kamalkamban.org, kamalkamban.org. When he was on the program and he was talking about Steve Coakley, rest in peace, he was talking about Steve Coakley, and he was saying that he thought it hurt him that he wasn't really connected to quote-unquote African culture, and that African culture, it kind of gives you some boundaries, some do's and don'ts, things that you do, things that you don't do that are in your interest, self-preservation, and that he thinks that a lot of black people, unfortunately, don't really have that those cultural guidelines, right, to serve as the antivirus to that white contamination that, it's going to get you. I mean, you're here. I think she said that repeatedly throughout the book. Everything is saturated with that. And if you don't have that protection to kind of give you something to be grounded in, things that you do, things that you don't do, you are going to be victimized in more ways than you know, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you all to the folks who have dialed in and been doing the reading. Like I said, it would have been fantastic if we'd had more folks doing the reading, keeping up. Would have made it a much more enjoyable experience, methinks. But, be that as it may. One of our listeners, they also commented there's a film. A lot of these aspects, you can see these you can see it everywhere, but you can see it in white literature, white films. One of our listeners was talking about the old television program Bonanza, the Western, where you can see a lot of these ideas. You have to have the quote-unquote cultural other, non-white people. Got to have them around because all of the violent and destructive tendencies of white people, that has to be focused. If it's not focused on non-white people, then white people would self-destruct. So you got to have these non-white people around. And then you see Bonanza, they have a non-white person. They have several non-white people present in some of the episodes. And a lot of their racism, white supremacy, their terroristic behaviors get directed at those non-white people. And even when they're not being directly terroristic, you get the paternalism. And Dr. Ani, she talks about that as well. We are the saviors. One of the episodes that I haven't seen a lot of Bonanza, but I watched one episode that they recommended. It's called The Brass Box. I think I remembered it correctly. If you all want to check it out. This one episode is a phenomenal illustration of white identification. I mean, woo! Man, oh man. If you want a case study in white identification, watch this episode. It's just 40 minutes. Any non-white people you know that you're trying to explain white supremacy to them, and if you think white identification is an important concept when you don't see white people as your enemy, the concept of that brotherhood, the universal family, universalism, and we're all in this together. Woo! Watch that episode, the Brass Box Bonanza. It's on YouTube. You can see the whole episode. It's only like 40 minutes, no commercials. Man, I'm not going to go into detail about it, so we can just keep it moving. But woo, man, oh man, you will be acting completely against your own self-interest when you are looking to have any sort of brotherhood, sisterhood with racist man, racist woman, racist child. You will act totally in the interest of white supremacy when you are white identified, believing in the rhetorical ethic of some sort of universal brotherhood, universal sisterhood with white people. I'll see if I can give one of the quotes from the book where she goes into more depth about that. I was on I was right on time. I was on 546. So I'm a little going after where one of our callers just read from. I'll give out the number again before I read in case there are any folks who did do the reading and they want to share. It's 760-569-7676 and the code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you're on that line. If you're on the TalkShoe line, it's star 8. This is on 546 at the bottom, very last sentence on 546 going over to 547. This use of the abstract humanist rhetoric can result in the most pernicious manifestation of European cultural imperialism simply because, if misunderstood, it gives the impression of representing the opposite of nationalistic self-interest in the form of humanitarian altruism while serving to sustain and proselytize European ideology. This brand of humanism is considered to represent the most progressive form of morality and is all the more detrimental from an African perspective as it is most attractive to European intellectuals and scholars who give the impression of looking critically at their own culture. It is these individuals who are in the best position to influence first world nationalists because it is they who gain easiest access. It is not surprising that it is the avowed European white nationalist, the separatist, who rejects the humanistic rhetoric and is usually more straightforward in representing his intentions. Before I proceed, just talking about these so-called European intellectuals and scholars who give the impression of looking critically at their own culture, talking about Timothy Don't Drink the Kool-Aid Wise and the rest of the so-called anti-racist white people. Dr. Peggy McIntosh, there are going to be more and more of these white people who say that they are not racist, and how she talks about these are going to be the people who have the easiest access to non-white people who are attempting to work against racism, white supremacy, and man, have I seen that play out over and over again, where black people, non-white people who are a little bit less confused when they get serious about trying to deal with racism, the people who have a huge impact on their thinking end up being the Timothy Wises of the world. Man, you are already compromised off the rip. But continuing. The abstract concept of the good person is consistent with the European Udumawazo. He is the universal man in that he is committed to the welfare of all and identifies with no particular group of people. He is not parochial, he is international. He is not motivated by limiting and constraining emotional attachments. Therefore, he is liberated through reason and intellect so that he can identify with the universal suffering of man. He doesn't love people, he loves humanity. He does what he does out of a commitment to abstract ideals. He has reason above nationalism. He is internationalist. This is the syntax of European rhetorical ethic. But Europeans resemble this description no more than do majority peoples. The successful promulgation of European empire is, in fact, due to the intensity of their nationalistic or particularistic commitment and to the uniquely inhumane definition of their national cause. Very important. I think that goes back to our female caller when she was saying that the irony that white people will talk about them being so concerned with universal brotherhood, universal sisterhood, when nothing could be further from the truth. They are the most exclusive armed terrorist organization on the planet, but all the while giving the impression as though we are always of peace. And a lot of it is through words. They are extraordinarily good with putting together all sorts of cute phrases. Yes, we are about humanity. Yes, we are about everyone. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I was saying from Bonanza, the episode The Brass Box, man, you can see it play out easily, and you will see the Voltron effect on display. You'll get to see the terrorist arm of racist man, racist woman. You get to see the white savior. You get to see the paternalism, the whole nine. I think the only element that's missing, the firewater, you get to see the whole nine. I think the only element that's not there is the white woman. That's the only element that I think is missing from that episode. And I haven't seen this episode. I was just certain because it's Bonanza. It's got to be racism, white supremacy. It's white people with guns. What else could it be? If you need another episode where the white woman is present and you can see her contribution to the terrorist white army, I think it's called The Death of Virginia City. Now, I haven't seen this episode, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think this one, the white woman and the damage that she can cause. The Death of Virginia City, and you can see this on YouTube. Even the guy I'm watching it, the guy that's in Bonanza, he was on Little House on the Prairie, which is another plantation fiction. White people in their idyllic little setting out in the prairies, fighting off the no good Indians. Little House on the Michael London, that's his name. Anywho, I'll double check the folks. Our Skype caller, your line should be open 8225. Do y'all have anything as we proceed?
I just have an example of a film demonstrating when the European asili does not have the other in their mix will be the movie called Revolutionary Road, starring Winslet. That's an excellent film to demonstrate when the other is not present in the function of the European asili in their worldview. They begin to self-destruct towards one another. So I just wanted to give that as an example.
Revolutionary Road, that's the name of it?
Correct.
Okay. Revolutionary Road. Okay. One to check out. What happens when there are no non-white people present? I was thinking, I don't know if I have seen films or read any films in per se where there are no white people, no non-white people present. I was thinking Lord of the Flies might qualify. I think in that one, they make some of the white people into non-white people. I think that's what happened as that story evolves. I don't know if people read the book or have seen the film, but I think that's what happens. You end up kind of having two groups of white. You got to have the competition, right? She's been talking about that the whole time. You got to have a contest. There's got to be some form of control. That's what power is, control over other. So they end up being two groups, that dichotomy, and the one group, they end up being niggerized. They wear war paint. They're not rational. She talks about it in the book. I think that's what happens in Lord of the Flies. One of the groups gets niggerized. They become non-white, so to speak. But yeah, I'll have to check that. Revolutionary Road. Folks want to check that out and comment. Revolutionary Road.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
As you were saying that, and you're saying you couldn't think of any movies. Clockwork Orange came to mind as far as no people of color being in that movie, but definitely the presence of the ultraviolence, to quote the movie. And there was one quote I wanted to grab. Basically, it was on 549, and it said, the most liberal and progressive Europeans take the position that they are best qualified to lead the rest of us in war against their people. And that reminded me of Afrikan. And I'll leave it there.
Can you say the quote again, please?
549, and maybe I'm making this up because I was I know, but I was for a lot of the time I was quoting verbatim. but it said the most liberal and progressive Europeans take the position that they are best qualified to lead the rest of us in our war against their people.
That's true.
And why? Right there.
Pseudo-scientific bullshit. Absolutely. That's Avatar too, though. That's totally Avatar. Wow. Excellent point. Excellent point. Wow. Yeah, you see that in a lot of films. It's Eminem. I mean, you see it all the time, where white people, all areas of people activity, really, anything that non-white people are doing, white people come in, take it over, and say that we are now best. I mean, it's got to be them in everything. They got to dominate, but we are the ones who are supposed to be the best at all things. We are supposed to be the model, the universal model for anything that is good, that is of value. It is supposed to be white people. Excellent illustrations, Timothy and Avatar.
And I got one more quote just on the topic of it. It just made me think of Eminem as well. On 539, it says, the world culture objective protects liberal Europeans from self-examination. And in relation to Eminem, I would think that, everything he talked about, you could, like the suffix thing where you say, da-da-da-da-da, in bed, For Eminem, you could say, all his trials and tribulations and quote-unquote white trash living, da-da-da-da-da, for white people, So it's not being codified as such, but you could easily read into all the trials and tribulations that he's gone through, as being indicative of their culture. But he's not going to have the identification or exemplify himself and say, this is me, it's just, or my people. Because he would be easily qualified to tell you the difference in his relation between black folks and white folks. I'm sure the black folks in his life treat him a lot better than white folks. But he can't come out and say that, and he would have no incentive to do it.
Absolutely. It's reminding me of when MC Search, I don't know if people remember his rap group Third Base, Searchlight Publishing. He was in Bamboozled, Spike Lee's film with Jada Pinkett Smith, and who else? Lots of people. Mos Def, Damon Wayans, Michael Rappaport, lots of people were in it. Paul Mooney. He was in Bamboozled as well. He was part of the Mau Mau's. Anyway, he was on the program almost 3 years ago at this point, and he was talking, same dynamic, being a white person doing quote-unquote hip-hop music. We talked about Eminem as well. And he's married to a non-white person, man. Anywho, yeah, it makes total sense, and I think Eminem, I think both MC Search and Eminem know that they are treated, black people treat them very well. They end up becoming, exemplary figures in hip-hop just because they are white. Treated extremely well just because they are white.
Yeah, I would say they were treated definitely, as the tendency is for us to do that, but generally we treat people rather kindly. That was just family. But no doubt, through the syndrome, we I'm sure they got plenty of treatment. I mean, he was an A&R at one point. Not a lot of rappers become A&R, so.
MC Search, he talked about it on the program. He owns the publishing to Nas's first album. Might even be first two, but I know it definitely. Illmatic, for folks out there who are here, he owns the publishing to that. Think about that. I mean, which isn't even anomalous. It's not that that's even, worth an eyebrow. That always ends up being the case where white people end up owning the publishing to black music artists, historic black music artists, where some white person ends up owning their publishing. So, not anomalous. But we did talk about that on the program. Right on. Righty. Just make sure folks are clear on the whole universalism and how that really is the damaging impact that has on our efforts to replace white supremacy with justice, and really just being truthful and dealing with white people and solving this problem. This is on 548. As a result, the anthropologist's self-knowledge, engagement, and involvement are discouraged. In general, the abstractification of morality tends to create an unreal context for commitment, and the emphasis on transcultural can result in a de-emphasis on the concrete and immediate. It can be a form of dehumanization. It leads to what Wade Nobles calls a transubstantive error. Transubstantive errors are literally mistakes of meaning. They occur when cultural manifestations of two groups of people are similar, yet the cultural substance which gives these manifestations meaning is different. The knower of one culture will attribute meaning, for instance, to one behavior of a member of another culture utilizing his or her own cultural substance. To the extent that the cultural substance of the groups differs, the knower will erroneously interpret the behavior in terms of his or her own perspective and thereby commit a transubstantive error. Europeans are not the only ones who make transubstantive errors, although they may be the only ones who make them intentionally. We Africans and other primary peoples also make such errors when we trust Europeans and treat them as family, taking them at their word. The concept of Asili has been created to prevent us from making these mistakes. Using it, we can interpret European culture in terms of its own nature. Excellent point in my view. I'm skipping. This is on... the quote on 549. Europeans take the position they are best qualified to lead the rest of us in our war against their people. Let's see. Skipping. This is on 551. 551. Second paragraph. It is very helpful to examine an example of one of these more subtle expressions of European nationalism. In her discussion, 3,000 Years of Racism, Merlin Stone universalizes the phenomenon of racism into an historical process and tells us to remember that there are moral qualities in all people, and that no race or ethnic group has been totally morally and ethically perfect. She barely mentions African descendants in her study. The result is twofold. If one accepts her analysis description, she herself becomes one of the good guys, separated from 3,000 years of racist behavior, and our justifiable rage is diffused as we come to understand ourselves as only insignificant, if unfortunate targets of a universal process that has significantly victimized darker Europeans. She tells us to combat racism by the study of the ethics and morals of pre- and non-Christian religions, and by explaining that the earliest known cultural accomplishments of humankind were those initiated and developed by darker-skinned peoples. She is vague as to the identity of these peoples. Yet blatantly missing from her bibliography are the very people who have committed their lives to this endeavor, from Edward Wilmot Blitten to Sheikh Anta Diop, Cowbell, Deuce Muhammad, Yosef Ben Yakinen, John Henrik Clark, and a host of other scholar warriors from the African diaspora. We cannot mobilize for effective resistance to our physical destruction unless we are ideologically liberated. What impedes that liberation is cultural imperialism. European universalism and its attendant spurious humanism are very dangerous and effective forms of European cultural imperialism. Universalism, when translated scientifically, becomes objectification. The illusion of objectivity promotes the myth of universalistic commitment. That is, it is a stance that disavows political or group interest. It thereby serves group interest more subtly by calling it something other than what it is. We can conclude that this universalism semantically represents European value. It is not a universally valid goal and, as an imperative, serves the interest of European cultural imperialism in the following manner. Once individuals are persuaded that universal characteristics are the proper human goals, European patterns and values can be presented as universal while others are labeled as particular. The European ideology can be proselytized without the appearance of imposition, invasion, conquest, exploitation, or chauvinism. The European claim to universalism is a formidable weapon, and victims of European aggression can successfully combat it if we proceed as follows. Number 1, refuse to accept universality as either humanly possible or desirable. Number 2, critically assess all universalistic concepts, including monotheism, scientific objectivity, progressivism, abstract humanism, and reject them when they are found to represent European values only and to conflict with conceptualizations based on our own ideologies. Number 3, accept nationalism, that is, cultural commitment, as a potentially positive, liberating, and constructive expression of human energy depending on the specific content and definition that is given. If we are mindful of these cultural facts, European self-interest expressed as universalism will become highly visible as an expression of European nationalism and cultural commitment, and will thereby lose its intellectual and ideological effectiveness. We will be able to recognize ourselves as victors, for it is now clear that European universalism acts to fulfill the expansionist Ultima Rojo as it serves the ideological function of Ultima Wazo, cognitive structure, and the power needs of the Asili, the cultural essence, rather than being understood then as the new non-partisan morality of an international order. We must interpret universalism in its European context in terms of the particularity of the European Asili. It is the quintessential statement of European nationalism. Very important conclusion to chapter 10 in my view. And again, that did not play that at the beginning about Dr. Martin Luther King to disparage him. He is a victim of white supremacy, but rather just to show the consequences. Not understanding white people, not understanding racism, white supremacy. Again, it just puts you in position to be continually terrorized by them. We really got to get away from thinking that, we all have a common history and we're all in this together, and white people have just kind of had a bad run of brutalizing other people. No, it really comes down to having a much better grasp, a much deeper understanding of what it means to be a white person, who they are and how they function, particularly with regards to black people, getting a better understanding of that and incorporating that into the way that we think, speak, and act to end white supremacy as soon as possible. Real important concepts in my view. Let's see. I'll double check if any of the folks have things they want to share. I'll also give out the number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#.
If I could say a quote from 555, I believe, real quick. The scattered, distant voices of the European tradition are made ineffective through the power of the Asili, itself power-seeking. And what that I think she means there is that the anomalous voices that object to the power-seeking nature of their character as a people are made mute or moot. It doesn't matter because they're anomalous. They're very strange.
Greatest mystery on the planet. And I think that really, I think we had a guest on the program, if I'm not mistaken, David Livingston. I don't want to say his whole name because I messed it up, but he wrote up this whole book about why we dehumanize, and he kept doing exactly that. He kept trying to say that the behavior of white people was not peculiar to them, that everybody has participated in some sort of abuse and mistreatment of other people on the planet, and this is not anything that is exclusive to white people, even though he had to continually acknowledge that, yeah, white people have done this unlike anyone else, and our record, he's a white person, our record isn't really comparable to anything that anybody else, any non-white people have done. So it was like, man, you're contradicting yourself. You can't say that on the one hand and then say that, well, you know, this is representative. I mean, people just do this. All people do this. Everyone dehumanizes to some degree, and everyone commits some form of terrorism, war, injustice against other forms of people. And it was, you can't keep doing that. And he also was sexually involved with a non-white person. Yeah, that is a constant pattern amongst white people to not isolate. And I think it's helpful. It causes that sort of confusion where we keep looking for that universal brotherhood, and we want to be down with white people and not isolating their behavior, their conduct, and saying, hey, your thought and behavior patterns are exclusive to your group. Nobody else functions like you, and I should make sure to keep that in the forefront of my mind at all times.
Yeah, universally or universally, I just writing down notes. What I get from this book is basically under European Platonic rationality and logic, an unaffected psychopath would be, in their estimation, the best judge or arbiter of anything, evaluator. And, you know, because they're impartial, disinterested, wouldn't give two bits about either of you. And that made me just now think of, in the Batman movies, Two-Face, which is a very interesting character, and that he will sit there and flip a coin to decide whether to pass judgment on you right then and there. You know, supposedly on a good side, a bad side. He's a district attorney. It could be the good cop, bad cop, summarized quite well. And in any event, you're probably going to end up with some harm if you're even encounter him, you know, just as the character. So it's a very good character, I think, now that I think about it. But go ahead.
That's Yurugu right there. Another example. Incomplete, I think, his character. He has lost his female partner. She dies, and he goes on a rampage after that. He's lost his female energy, incomplete being, and he goes on a destructive rampage from that point forward, terrorizing everybody. I think that excellent example of the Yurugu. Exactly what isn't that the character? I'm not up on my Batman mythology, but isn't that his character? His female partner dies, and he blames Batman for it.
I believe you're right.
I have a question in terms of female character, losing the female character. Does that also explain why the Yurugu themselves, especially the males, tend to dress up as women because they lost their female halfness or energy source?
You said, does that explain why for European males, because they lost the female energy, does that explain why they dress up as females?
Yes.
That could be.
And here comes the dichotomy again. They dress up, I was thinking they dress up, white men dress up as women, yet at the same time, in their own cultural paradigm, they oppress their women. So it's like a never-ending battle here.
Yeah, I think you have to examine, more than likely, for the people that would do that, what their relationship with their mothers and fathers would be like. And would it be like they thought that their mothers were persecuted, so they're living the life that they wished she could have lived? Or is it something entirely different where they hate their mothers and think they could do their mother's job better than them?
That is interesting. That could go the same for the so-called homosexual behavior, and that behavior reflecting some sort of need to compensate for the loss of that female energy.
I also thought, or I don't want to, you can think about that, but I want to add into what, how deeply their thinking has infected our thinking, and I'm sure it was discussed perhaps on this show and previous episodes of the archive, but just the concept of a lawn with nothing but grass, and nothing that grows to sustain life for, people, like fruits, that's how European that is. And then the accoutrement, fences, of course, they go with those lawns, but just the lawns in particular, how a waste of, let's say water, it is.
I've heard white people, quote unquote liberal white people who live out here in the Pacific Northwest, comment on that, and how exactly what you said, it's a waste of space. And non-white people would have more of a tradition of that would be a garden or something. It would not just be barren space with nothing there. How you wouldn't even have that, like in nature, you would not just have like a field of grass like that. There would be other stuff there, trees, plants, something would be there, taking up that space. And then the obsession over it. You got to have the fence, and you can't walk on it. You can't step on it. You got to be on the, just all of that. The control, obsessive control of people, nature, things, and to some sort of non-productive result, right? The lawn, the grass is not going to produce anything. There's going to be no yield, no crops, not even flowers generally, just bare grass. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes me also think of once again, them denigrating us for doing something that they, pride themselves, so that they go camping a lot more than we do. But how do they describe the way that people in Africa live? Like it's heathens, and they don't even have houses. Well, we're going camping. It's going to be so much fun. Yeah.
Absolutely. All of those contradictions, I think this book calls that out. There's so many rampant contradictions in their behavior. I think a lot of it is compensation. Even that contradiction, dressing up as a female, participating in the so-called homosexual behavior, all the while constantly devaluing the female presence, female energy, females in general. Major contradiction.
In the conclusion portion, which we're about to get to, I found when I was reading the conclusion, your prior guest, the Indian guy, the doctor, talking about racism in the medical practitioner sort of speak field. Do you remember that guest, Gus?
Dr. I might be saying his name incorrectly. Dr. Sarah Singh. Yes. Yes.
Him. Yeah. When I was reading the conclusion, I was thinking of him in terms of when Dr. Ani brought up the aspect of spirituality. On page 558, it says in the first paragraph towards the middle, spirituality represents a constant threat to the order system that they have constructed. They therefore suffer from a chronic fear of spiritual implications. They distrust spirituality and humanness in people and in culture. And what I found so profound about your guest was that he kept hinting at the way in order to combat racism, white supremacy. He put forth the fact that non-white people need to get back in touch with their spirituality. And he believed that spirituality will arm non-white people to fight against racism, white supremacy.
I remember that distinctly. He visited us live from India. I remember I had said I wanted to make a sound clip. I thought that was really profound when he was talking about that, because I think a lot of people, they get real disgusted with spirituality, any talk of it, really, because it's been so contaminated with white supremacy. We were talking about that with Mr. Khalifa on Monday, and he was talking about how Nat Turner, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, a lot of the people that are renowned for working against racism, white supremacy, they have been ministers. They have been deeply spiritually connected and saw what they were doing to work against white supremacy as being ordained by the Creator. And we were saying on Monday, the same thing Dr. Singh was saying, that that has got to be reincorporated in how we go about countering white people. We cannot allow them to sever and continue to contaminate our connection to the Creator and bringing that spiritual connection back in. And I think, Doctor, that's all over the book, where she's saying that white people, their entire culture is secular and non-spiritual, and they are about the desacralization of everything. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is, has any spiritual nature, not even religion. And how we need to be doing the exact opposite. I remember he was even saying, if you are feeling personally down, to not think of it in terms of your individual suffering, that this is bigger than you as an individual, that there are a lot of people that are going through this. There are a lot of non-white people that are being victimized in this way, and not keeping it focused on you as an individual victim, but keeping it more in focus of how you are connected to the entire universe. That can be a major tool in helping you to not get bogged down and depressed, and will help give you the energy to maintain that fight against racism. I remember it well. I thought that was a really profound commentary from Dr. Singh.
Then what I also found interesting too was on page 558 at the bottom, the last paragraph towards the bottom. There is no source of conflict with this process from religious quarters, since formalized European religion has itself been secularized. If nothing is sacred, then no act is sacrilegious. The result is a worldview that encourages attitudes of arrogance and disrespect, attitudes that are in the modality of imposed order, control, and power. Conversely, humility, respect, and a reverence for the natural order are in the modality of harmony and balance. Then I'm going to skip to 559 to the second paragraph, where it says, intraculturally, there is no basis for morality. Instead, there is merely a competitive ethic. The well-being and success of each desperate self or ego is threatened by that of others. Instead of being dependent on their well-being, European social structures depend for their proper, efficient functioning on mutual aggression, distrust, and competitiveness, i.e., fundamentally hostile relationships. If love were to enter into these microsystems, they would break down. I thought that was very, very interesting because I see that Europeans use the abstraction of love, but not the real essence of love, which is tied into the spirituality, which they themselves feel as a constant threat to their self-ego and to their silly. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Then if you continue on in that paragraph, it goes with the whole male-female dynamic. It goes, but there are insured against this occurrence since they breed for cold calculation and reward competitiveness and aggression. In a recent psychological test, the male personality was described as aggressive, assertive, ambitious, competitive, dominant, forceful, independent, self-reliant, while the female personality was affectionate, compassionate, gentle, loving towards children, loyal, sensitive, sympathetic, understanding, warm. Obviously, the male characteristic corresponds to the European self-image. They represent those behavioral tendencies that are valued in the culture and are necessary for success in its system. The so-called female traits are those with which the culture does not wish to identify. They are a liability in a materialized world, all right for those who are to remain in the home, but not for the leaders and breadwinners. Imbalance enters the picture, which coincides with the spiritual reference she made on page 558. So I thought that was interesting.
We had the ambiance of the siren going by reminded me of when she was talking about the real jungle is not on the continent. The real jungle is the cities that have been constructed by white people, where any sort of danger, terrorism can happen at any moment. Muggings, stabbings, drug addicts, prostitution. The city represents the real jungle, as the siren went by. That set on 558 and 559, when you were saying like that contradiction of white men degrading females and not valuing the female energy, but that contradiction of them dressing up in female clothing, and even, I would suggest perhaps even the so-called homosexual activity. It was making me think about the prolific numbers of Jerry Sandusky incidents. That also could be why so many white men view, and it would even go Greco-Roman. She's got all the references to Plato and how the Asili and Udumoroho of white people has been developing for centuries, and goes back to a lot of the foundation, goes back to a lot of these white philosophers in Greco-Roman society, where the white man, white boy relationships were viewed as the pinnacle of quote unquote love and an erotic relationship between two people. And for what you just read, I could see it making sense if you got this Yurugu, the incomplete being, no female energy, where, and with taking in what Michael Bradley says, where you've got this conflict around sexual intercourse and viewing females as a totally different species, the sexual dimorphism from Michael Bradley, the Iceman inheritance. I could see perhaps where white men would feel most comfortable with a child. It's another male, not a female, since we're totally about degrading the female energy, and even viewing females as being perhaps a different species because of that sexual dimorphism. It's another male. It's a child, so I feel even less threatened because I'm stronger than this person, and I'm mentally more adept as well. So I can totally control every aspect of this person, and it's another male. So I'm not in touch with any of the weaker characteristics that are associated with female. I could see it being like the best of all worlds for a male, the Yurugu for the white male. I could see that being the best of everything. And I'm with another male, so I'm getting more male energy. I'm not being contaminated by female energy, and I'm with someone where I can dominate that person. It would make sense for you, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jerry Sandusky. That would make sense for Yurugu if I'm synthesizing the material correctly.
And to coincide with the last sentence on page 559 in the second paragraph, and balance enters the picture, you can jump to page 561, and I'm going to read the second paragraph. It says, twisted by the ideological demands of the culture into value characteristics, they are made to seem positive, superior, even healthy. They are instead manifestations of a culture ego and disequilibrium, created in a spiritless context. The European Utamaroho lacks the balance that comes from an informed experience of the whole self. The self that then emerges, defined in disharmony, seeks further to despiritualize its surroundings. The effectively despiritualized context it creates redefines an Utamaroho that is in essential imbalance in basic disequilibrium. Chronically insufficient and spiritually inadequate, this Utamaroho even seeks spiritual fulfillment, a harmonious condition. Europe is a cultural statement of Yurugu, the male being, arrogant and immature, who caused his own incompleteness, and so is locked into a perpetual unfulfilled search for the female twin soul that will make him whole, the part of himself he has denied. The European Udamoroho is seeking the self it lacks, but the possibility of spirituality as a recognized and valued dimension of experience has been denied to Europeans by the presupposition and definition of their ulmawazo, by their worldview, and perhaps, as in the case of Yurugu, by the circumstance of their birth. They therefore interpret their needs to lie elsewhere, an error that sets in motion the process of European development. Because assessment of their needs is blurred by what Theodore Roszak has called single vision, because they search in the wrong dimension of human experience, and because they are, by definition, deficient, Yurugu, their search is unending. The more unsatisfying the pursuit, the greater is the assurance of the continued existence of a Udamoroho and disequilibrium. An uninstilled spirit. The unchanging character of the European Udamoroho and the indirectional driving force of the culture are therefore guaranteed. Its success and failure are inseparable and causally linked. I think that there says a lot.
I concur. I've been reading multiple things at once. I'm getting my final rant in. For folks who, it's a lot to read. It's a big book. It's 500 pages. We spent 2 months reading, right? I said, you don't have to read it all in one day. You can take your time, set your own pace. If we went too fast, you can chop it down and, read 20 pages a week or whatever, 15 pages a week. Make it smaller. I know people have said also that there are a lot of words that they don't understand. Have a dictionary close by when you read and just look up as you go. And read, look up, you'll expand your vocabulary. That's one of the important features of reading. You learn when you read material. But as I have been reading this for the second time, I have also read Mr. Khalifi. He was on the program Monday. We were discussing his book, Acquisition and Proper Use of Power. That book is 400 pages. I read Sylvia Coleman, her book, Creating a New Normal. That book's a little less than 200 pages. And I just started Robert Dvorak, his book Game Over. He'll be on the program Sunday. So while I've been reading this, I've been reading other material as well. Just repeating what Dr. Welsing said, reading is more important than watching television. I'm sure a lot of people out there who did not keep up with the reading have watched television, probably hours of television in the 2 months that we've been doing this. I think at the pace that we set, if you had just sat aside maybe 30 minutes a day, you could have kept up with the reading easily. And I'm pretty sure most of the people listening to this program spend at least 30 minutes a day in front of the television watching something. That said, I've been reading Game Over. I actually got the audiobook, so I've been having it read to me. But for Game Over, and they talked about how Jerry Sandusky and his wife, they couldn't have children. And Dr. Anishi says in the book that the European man is impotent, which you just read, that imbalance and denying the female energy and nothing is sacred and being in a constant state of disequilibrium, where nothing is sacred. Total disrespect of everything, and power being control. Power being control over others. And it just, the more that I'm thinking on it, it makes more and more sense why you see so many of these white men in these relationships. I can't even say relationships, participating in pedophilia, having sexual intercourse with young boys. It seems like it would be, if we get Dr. Ani on the program, I'm going to ask her about that, because that would seem like a natural expression of Yurugu. degradation of female energy, the incompleteness, the impotence, domination over other, what better expression would I have than taking sexual advantage of a young boy for a white man?
Yep. And on page 562 at the very bottom, to coincide, the European ultima rojo translates the search for fulfillment into fanatical expansionism. The expansionism endemic to European culture is constantly reinforced by the unstable desire for complete rational order, which in concrete terms comes to mean the European ordering of the world. For the European ultima rojo, order comes to mean European control, since it is by projecting the rational self that the world becomes order. A cultural definition that helps to create a unique ultima rojo and ultima rojo that demands exactly this cultural view. Only by destroying the order inherent in the cosmos can this ultima rojo regenerate itself. Projection of ego is substituted for fulfillment of self. This ultima rojo eternally seeks an emotional satisfaction it cannot express. The ideology of progress is but an expression of this ultima rojo. It is predicated on the destruction of a harmonious, organic order and seeks to replace it with a rational and mechanical one. Then I want to just jump down to the last portion of the paragraph. To control for this ultima rojo means to render passive. Once a thing, person, or culture can be acted upon at will by the European self-ego, that self is considered to have expanded. Expansionism is the increase of its domain, hence the European concept of power, is the ability to manipulate and control, to make passive as an agent of change. It is power over, not power through. And I yield back to you.
That is Jeffrey Dahmer. That is Jerry Sandusky. That all of these white people that you keep, Cecil Rhodes. I don't know if people know that or not, but he also is reported to be doing the same thing. That is white people through and through, and it's white women that have been caught doing this too. The female at the CDC who was arrested last year, they never took her to court. We followed up and looked on the page. We had a listener who did their homework and said that she's not working at the CDC anymore, but I looked on the Georgia Department of Records and there was no court case. She wasn't convicted of anything. She's just not working at the CDC, so it's reported anymore. But that totally power over, not power through, power over, and objects to be acted on. I would even say, as she says, nothing is sacred. Dr. Kinsey, exactly, and I've seen Dr. Kinsey's work cited a lot in the past couple of weeks in reference to Jerry Sandusky and them saying this sympathy that we should not say that, you know, these are criminal acts and that this guy is some sort of monster, that we should feel bad for this guy. We should have some sympathy, that universalism again, that he's one of us. He's just got some problems. Not that this is exclusive behavior that we should be saying, hey, this is totally incorrect and, you know, we should not be looking to sympathize with this guy in any way, shape, or form. But it is totally, nothing is sacred. Not even the bond between a mother and a child, not even, you know, as an older person, as an elder, and me supposed to, my duty to protect a child, someone who is in a weak position. Forget that. It is about total disorder in all relationships and power. At the end of the day, power, and not power through, power over, and exerting power by the ability to act upon, to control, to render passive. That I can see that being acted out all the time. I can see why that is so satisfying for racist man and racist woman. They participate. Latrino, the Mary Kay Latrino case that was Laterno, that was right here also in Seattle, where she was having sex with her student. I can see why that's so satisfying for racist man, racist woman. You get to satisfy every aspect. And I suspect it only gets better when it can be a non-white child that you're doing this to. I suspect that really makes it complete. Now you're getting to satisfy every aspect of Yurugu, domination over the other.
Yep, and on page 564, at the very bottom onto page 565, as we have seen in the European understanding, power is predicated on destruction. The maintenance of the European Udmoroho requires the destruction of other people. They are the ideal objects of European power since they are most remote from the European self-image. With the redefinition of humanness in terms of rationality, European power, other people become subhuman. They must therefore be controlled, culturally destroyed. This can be done without the moral disruption of European culture, since with the help of objectification, such destruction is either not experienced or elaborately rationalized. While the Udmoroho demands destruction of others, it is simultaneously dependent on the existence of the cultural other for its definition and functioning. It is, after all, the European Udmoroho that is least self-sufficient. Without other, there is no possibility of power. It is in this sense that the European culture can never be self-reliant or ever constructively isolationist. Europe itself is barren, depending on the resources, spiritual as well as material, of others for its existence. In accordance with the historical record of European intracultural behavior, capitalism demonstrates this well. It is acquisitive and exploitive in principle. It must ever seek new markets to control, new resources to exploit. It can never be a system at rest. Communalism and the African worldview, on the other hand, are predicated on balance and interrelationship on the eternality of the moment. And if you jump down to the last paragraph, the characteristics of the European Udmurwazu, its intense rationalism, analysis, objectification, and lineality all contribute to the illusion of intellectual power and therefore to the achievement of material power. They are the mechanisms of mental control and manipulation necessary for the epistemological transformation of the world into something that does not question the European asili, but complements the European Udmurwaho and guarantees white supremacy. And I'll yield back to you.
I don't remember when I read this. I just read this portion in the last 24 hours. I was not reading all this and thinking, man, this just sounds like a case study of Jerry Sandusky and why all these white males, the white male in San Francisco who just got arrested, who was so-called, he was a humanitarian, so they say. But man, reading it the second time through, this sounds like a total explanation of why you have so many rampant examples of white men, especially white men, but white women as well, participating in pedophilia. I will pitch some of this to Mr. Dvorak on Sunday and see what he says. And again, if we can get Dr. Ani on the program, I'm going to ask her if this makes sense with her concept of Yurugu, particularly white men behaving in this manner, since she just said love is problematic. The possibility of spirit threatens its achievement. I'm just rereading. On a personal level, this makes love relationships even conceptually problematical, since love and power, as they are understood in the West, are opposites, love representing loss of self and therefore of control, while power demands control of self and emotional remoteness. You don't have to give up any of that if you're going to be sodomizing young children. You don't lose any power. You don't compromise yourself. You're not in a vulnerable position. You get to have You get to terrorize, victimize, and get your sexual gratification as well. We had someone dialed in 8662. Your line is open. Did you have a question or comment? 8662.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I was looking at page 567, like the beginning, sort of towards the end. It says, Europe is the cultural home of a people who identify as one race, i.e. banding together for survival and destruction of others. They would destroy each other if they were others to destroy. They fear and hate blackness, which they associate with spiritual power, a power which they neither possess, create, nor control. So to me, that summarizes a lot of, why they do what they do. It's because they have that intense fear. They want it, they're jealous of it, they're envy of it. The female principle, like Yurugu is separated from it because he's jealous of it, he wants it, he envies it, yet he says he doesn't want it because it's part of these, like Plato said, the other, the self, the bad part, the emotional part. So, and it does complement him. So it's like the missing piece, and that's why they sort of like hate women and abuse children and want to do all type of perverted things. That's just my opinion.
And to go along with that portion that the caller just made, I have to go back to page 63 because this page on 63 really cement everything for me. In the middle, it says, what is noble for the European causes anxiety. The European psyche needs the illusion of a rationally ordered universe in which everything can be known. Yet European mythoform creates an unknown and unknowable future whose only relationship to the past and the present is that it determines them and cannot be determined by them. This antagonistic situation causes emotional confusion, anxiety, and fear for the European. Participants in the culture, meaning European culture, have only one recourse against the fear: science. The purchasing of insurance is another attempt to escape the fear, but it does not work. Science becomes a force conjured up to battle another powerful force, the spiritual realm, the unknown, associated with blackness, etc. Science predicts. It prepares Europeans for the future. It is through science that they seek to relieve their anxiety by gaining control over what controls them. It is therefore dictated by their or the Asili. The European conception of science is above all secular and rests on alienating, literate, rationalistic, linear concept. The monster that the European have created, an example, Frankenstein, this abstract and oppressive future continues to threaten, to intimidate, to frighten. Everything is thought to move towards this future, a movement that imparts value, progress, and yet the perceived destiny is fear-producing. So I just think that's very key towards the very end of the conclusion where she brings up spirituality, blackness, etc. I'll yield back to you.
I agree with you. I really do. And let's see. That's all I had to say, really. But I know on page, I don't know where this far, but on 570, something kind of stood out to me. Right there in the middle of the page, it says, since Plato, the intellectual energies of Europeans have been devoted to convincing themselves and others of their superiority. As a result, the European tradition is a bastion of propaganda. Those who do not share European commitments have been forced to occupy themselves with denying the validity of this portrait, with refuting this inherited argument, and with offering a different view of meaning of European development. And also it goes on down to the second, well, almost the last paragraph. Now that we have broken the power of their ideology, we must leave them and direct our energies toward the recreation of cultural alternatives informed by ancestral vision of a future that celebrates our Africanness and encourages the best of the human spirit. Each of the culture historically victimized by Europe must reclaim its own image. As for those of us who are African, our salvation, redemption, lies in our ancientness and connectedness, not in a romanticized glorification of the past, but in a return to the center in which all contradictions are resolved and from which the spiral of development can continue with clarity. So this is kind of like, makes it say, like, since we now have dissected the European, we basically have to go back to ourself, which we more or less lost. That's where our spirituality, which was taken from us, but that's where all our salvation and that's where the answers to our problem lies, like our freedom is within ourselves, our soul, and our spirituality, which they really work on, as we do the violence to get us off focus on our spirituality. To me, they do a lot of, I guess that's to do with their behavior, but it kind of throws us off of our spirituality and off of our focus, which is getting back to the self, the soul. I mean, that which we lost. So that's what's going to redeem us and bring us back to where we need to be or take us on. So that was just my interpretation of it all.
Before I check to see if we have any final thoughts on Yurugu, I just think it's incredibly important text to get a deeper understanding of what it means to be a white person. I would say if they ask, do you think all white people are racist? Read this book. When you begin to think, and I say rhetorically, what does it mean to be a white person? Read this book. Study this book. Don't just read it. It has to, in my view, I think to get the most out of it, it has to be kind of an active experience. Reading, checking the bibliography, checking the footnotes, referencing, you're going to see some authors and text mentioned that you're not familiar with, so kind of checking on that. Definitions, you're going to see some terms that you're not familiar with, so having a dictionary present to kind of get as much meaning from the text as possible. So I think it has to be an active experience. Really going to have to use your brain, but take the time to read. I think this will really give you a much better grasp of what it means to be a white person. Someone asked in the room, should I fear and hate white people? I would say get a better understanding of what it means to be a white person, and I think this book is a phenomenal start in that direction. I can't recommend it enough. Would be remiss. She has so many great quotes from Arma. This is second to last page, and even over to the last page. She ends with Arma. She begins and ends. One of my favorite writers, Yi Arma. What a scene of carnage the white destroyers have brought here. What a destruction of bodies. What a death of souls. Against this, what a vision of creation yet unknown. Higher, much more profound than all erstwhile creation. What a hearing of the confluence of all the waters of life, flowing to overwhelm the ashen desert's blight. What an utterance of the coming together of all the peoples of our way, the coming together of all people of the way. Their news was also of relationships, of a beauty still to be realized, of paths to be found. Their news was of the way, the forgotten and the future way. All beauty is in the creative purpose of our relationships. All ugliness is in the destructive aims of the destroyer's arrangements. The mind that knows this, the destroyers will set traps for it. But the destroyer's traps will never hold that mind. The group that knows this and works knowing this, that group itself is a work of beauty, creation, and then skipping down, final quote from Armand, it is our destiny not to flee the predator's thrust, not to seek hiding places from the destroyer's left, triumphant, but to turn against the predators advancing, turn against the destroyers, and bending all our soul against their thrust, turning every stratagem of the destroyers against themselves, destroy them. That is our destiny, to end destruction utterly, to begin the highest, the profoundest work of creation, the work that is inseparable from our way, inseparable from the way. Again, making that connection between spirituality, the work of replacing white supremacy with justice, black liberation, ending white supremacy, being spiritually ordained. Very important thread, I think, runs throughout the entire book. Would like to do some Armand, but that's one, man, that is a tough read. That's not going to be like getting some of the fluff material out there and being able to breeze through. That's one of those that it's not as big, as I said before. 2,000 he's written a lot of books, but 2,000 seasons, it's not long. It's, I don't even know if it's 200 pages, but man, it is. You just heard, it is constant. It will make your brain computer work in a good way, I think. Before we wrap up, any closing comments people want to get on Yurugu, anything that they read, or parting comments they would like to get in before we wrap things up?
I just want to say this was an excellent book. I equate this to my own personal quote-unquote Bible. My book is highlighted in yellow from beginning to end, and I really, really enjoyed reading this book. This is such a great page turner. I cannot say it enough. And in regards to Black people in particular not willing to read, I think that also stems from our corrupt ideology and how that corrupt ideology has tampered with our own imagination of ourselves. That's all.
The other folks' line's open as well. I just wanted to ask really quick, the last sentence that you made about, just that last sentence, if you could repeat that again, please.
I said that I think the reason why Black people have a hard time reading, especially information that's constructive, is because we have a corrupt ideology which has tampered with our own imagination of ourselves. Because when you're reading a book, you have to set your mind to this destination or book that you're reading, and we're unable to do that due to the corrupt ideology we possess, due to the system of racism, white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Makes sense.
If I could say, it's been a great help personally for myself to read this book, just because I was always looking for something that would help me identify the pattern, which I already saw, but this clarifies it even further, so that, it puts a new spin on things that I've already seen. Sort of like the Fight Club movie, which I wouldn't recommend seeing, but I don't know. So, like, prior to this reading Yurugu, I might have been like thinking of let's say that there's something wrong with the conservatives in the United States because they don't lead the country. They don't think highly of other countries. And why can't they be like liberals and go around the world or whatever? Let's say I didn't think that way, but you could say I would, or I could say I would probably take the stance that you should see more of the world. But considering this book, I'm like, what are you gonna do when you're around the world? Sandusky, and it puts things in a new light or dark or develops. Who knows? But it's a very very helpful, and thanks for facilitating this. And I don't know exactly who you're talking about when you're saying people weren't reading the book, but they shall remain nameless because it was good for me.
Excuse me. May I make a comment?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed the book. Actually, this is my second time reading it. And I really enjoyed it with other people because I could sort of kind of get some of the mystery out of my head. But since I read this book, I have dreams. I mean, I always have dreams, but I had a dream that, I don't know, I was sitting down and, like, it was something like, I don't know if it was water or something like pouring drops of water kind of falling down on me. And that was, like, during the reading of this book. So it's kind of like this spiritual information was coming through me through the dreams, telling me this is what the book was going to be to me, like water drops coming down to, like, wake me up. But I really enjoy it. And then I think the book takes away some of the mystery of white people and also the fear. Because sometimes, because of different things that happen to us or to me or whatever, have this kind of fear of white people or this kind of like mystery of them. But she kind of, the way she just breaks it all down, when you go out and you walk down, you look at them differently. And you just kind of see them for who they really are. And they're not powerful at all when you look at it from her eyes, from her perspective, and kind of see who they really are. But I really love the book. I'm going to read it again and just go over different parts of it and some of the suggestions you did, like the bibliography and some of the different writers, because I did order that one book, C.O.W.S and the Rest of Us. It's like it's supposed to be coming in the mail pretty soon, so I want to kind of compare what she was saying to that. But I think it's a wonderful book, and I would recommend it to everybody because it's kind of like, of all the books, this one is the one that really kind of puts it all together like a puzzle, because you read different books here and there, but this one is the one for me that put it all together and you just go, oh, yeah, aha, I see now. So I really think, I'm glad you suggested this book, and I'm glad we have the study group, and it's really an eye-opener. Thank you.
Can't recommend it enough. Phenomenal read. I think it will really recalibrate your thinking about what it means to be a white person and how you should be conducting yourself with individuals who classify themselves as white. Dr. Marimba Ani Yurugu, An African-Centered Critique of European Cultural Thought and Behavior. Definitely read and recommend to other black people. Any black person who, they're talking about racism and they want to get serious, bang, Yurugu. And I think if they, are serious, they will pick up other books. Dr. Bobby E. Wright, Psychopathic Racial Personality and Other Essays. I hadn't heard of that book until I read this. Michael Bradley, The Iceman Inheritance. Hadn't heard of that until I read this. Joel Covell. I hadn't heard of his work. It's tons of people. I just hadn't heard of their material until I read this. So you will really benefit a lot if you read it carefully, take notes, check the bibliography section, have a dictionary present. You will benefit a lot. I will get that blog post done so that all of the study sessions that we've done on this will be in one spot. So if anybody decides that they want to read, or I know some people have said they have been reading, they just haven't kept up with our pace, but they have been reading. So if folks are still reading the book, I know some people said they got the book late, so they're behind. So that if you want to just have an easy reference point so that you can easily get to all the programs, I'll put that up on my blog with the video on YouTube Dr. Ani, where she spends about 2 hours talking about the book. And again, hopefully we can get her on the program so that we can get information directly from the source. I can't wait to ask her about Sandusky and all this pedophilia, because I think that's in line with her concept of Yurugu as well. You should write. Any of the folks out there who've read the material, you should write a blog, write a book review. That's how I found out about it. Josh Wickett did a book review of this. You should write. That could kind of help get this information out to other black people. Write a book review. What did you learn? What did you think? It might even be good to help you understand what it is that you read so that you don't forget it. Some of the major points that you take away from the book. Write a book review. Might be helpful, might motivate some other black people to read. And then you can link the study sessions. You can pick the ones where you talk so they can hear hear what you had to say about the book. Might help encourage some other black people to read. We'll be back tomorrow. The compensatory call-in. My final jam. Take a note, if the programs where we're not on a book, where we're not doing a book club type thing, if we're talking about sexual intercourse, the number of people who call in, who want to chat when it's on sex between white people and non-white people, just an observation of when the number of people that call to talk about that, right? But we'll be on tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll be on compensatory call-in. You can dial in, share your views, thoughts, observations, research projects, what have you. Again, the sexual trauma, I know sexual molestation, that's going to be a big topic for the month. You can dial in. We can spend some time talking about that. I know that's a major issue for a lot of listeners. That'll be coming up on Sunday. Robert Dvorak, his second visit on the cows, his new book, Game Over, Jerry Sandusky and Penn State, that whole crisis. We'll be talking about that Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Lots of those broadcasts coming up. Again, Amos Camille, the author of the piece in the New York Times Magazine on prep school predators. He'll be on the program Thursday evening. Definitely looking forward to that. He also will be bringing another guest who is an attorney who is at a different prep school in New York, who is also, same thing, case of sexual predators being able to function at a school for years, decades, and nobody did anything. There kept being reports. The white officials didn't do anything about it. Just let this roll on. That'll be this coming up Thursday. Really looking forward to that as well. To wrap things up, there was a sound clip where I was speaking with Mr. Fuller, and I think it kind of my takeaway point, one of many, but I think the main theme in terms of really getting a better understanding of what it means to be a white person. I was speaking with Mr. Fuller, and I will kind of conclude there. I would say racism, white supremacy, those are synonyms for white people. That's what it means to be a white person, and I think this book gives you a lot of evidence to support whether or not that is true. Racism, white supremacy, white person, these are all synonyms. They mean the same thing. To be a white person is to be a racist white supremacist. It's in the very DNA, the asili of the culture. It's going to be expressed in a myriad of ways, implicitly, explicitly. That is the default behavior pattern for white people. And I think the quicker that we get to that and stop, being confused and thinking they could be rehabilitated, that it's not all white people, the quicker that we can get more non-white people to understand that, the quicker we will get this problem solved. This is Mr. Fuller closing us out. Again, we'll be back tomorrow. Much obliged to everybody who called in and did the reading. It was great hearing from you all. We will hopefully have some more reading groups in the future. The next one will be an audiobook, not a reading book, so that people can just listen, tune in. We'll be all on the same page at the same pace. You just tune in and listen and give our comments. If I could get 2,000 Seasons as an audiobook, we'd be doing it tomorrow. If anybody finds it, let me know. I haven't found it as an audiobook as of yet, but hopefully we can make that happen as well. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Invest in the cows if you think it is constructive, listener supportive. Definitely appreciate everybody who has contributed, and we will be back many times this week. Be very active July for the context of white supremacy. Mr. Fuller will take us out. Thank you all for listening in.
Wrote about he wrote a book basically about how all of the presidents have conformed to the system of white supremacy in different ways, and he was talking about how some of them would just say something about racism, and black people would get very happy, but then they wouldn't do anything. And he said some of the presidents just commented about how confused they were. Like they just wouldn't seem to understand. These people would just come out and make a comment or two about racism, and black people would think, oh, we got a friend, this person is for us, and they would never do anything to help them. They would just, keep pushing white supremacy along. And I was thinking, like, we're non-white people, we're so confused about this. Like a non-white person I spoke to today, he said that the whole situation in Jannah, he said he didn't understand how people, he said he felt like people were trying to make it more about race than it was. And I said, well, I don't think you have that situation. You don't have a problem of racism, white supremacy. I mean, to my knowledge, that whole situation is more of the evidence that we are in a system of white supremacy. I don't know, just that confusion, like people, non-white people not really understanding what white supremacy means, how much.
That's why I put it in the front of the book. If you don't understand that, then everything else that you do understand will confuse you. And I've seen that ever since I've been talking about it, and even before then. That's how that phrase came into being, that quotation. I put it in the front of the book to remind people of that. Ain't no point in going nowhere and doing nothing if you don't understand that. Because everything that you do is going to make complete nonsense. Everything that you think that you want to do is going to turn out to be a bunch of nonsense if you don't understand that. Because, see, this is all about the connections with the meaning of existence. Everybody, has a reason or think that they should have a reason for existing. If you're existing on this planet and you don't have no perceptions of understanding about white supremacy and what it works, to the extent that you lack these perceptions, your entire existence is going to be a total mess, because you're not going to make sense to yourself about nothing that you do or nothing that you plan on doing. It's just that way, because that's the biggest show in town. It's the only one that counts. That's just a fact of the matter, and it's a very unhappy situation.
Amen. Have white people made that their reason for being on the planet, to practice white supremacy?
Yes, and so you are wound up with two basically types of people on the planet, and that is the white culture, which is white supremacists, and the victim culture, which is the non-white people. And that's it. And the victim culture is just what the victim culture is. I mean, people walking around acting like victims.